Chapter 175. The red robe fluttered and the crowd could only see a red shadow flashing across the stage. A figure cried out and fell off the stage. Ah! A pharmacist fell to the ground in a sorry state. He was scratched by the sharp stones on the ground. Because he fell in the wrong way, he could not stand up. On the stage, a young master dressed in red stood. His robes fluttered in the wind, and his mask, which was covered with blooming red spider lilies, reflected a dazzling light under the sunlight. Everyone could only see a faint smile on his lips, and his entire body emitted a cold and evil aura. His gaze was contemptuously looking at the middle-aged alchemist who was sitting in a sorry state below the stage. When Ling Mohan, who was sitting on the stage, saw this scene, his deep black eyes flashed with a faint light as he stared at the cold and evil figure. He saw the figure suddenly turn around and meet his sharp eyes without warning. It was also at that moment that the light in his eyes dissipated. He sat there quietly, his face stiff and his expression solemn. Fengjiu looked at him in surprise. He felt that this uncle was a person who hid very well. She had interacted with him many times. However, it seemed that every time she interacted with him, she could find a different side of him. What kind of person was he? The crowd on the stage only glanced at the pharmacist who fell off the stage and did not pay attention to him. The middle-aged man secretly pushed the young man in red. Many people saw it. Therefore, it was not surprising that he was kicked off the stage by the young man in red. The head of the family that the middle-aged pharmacist belonged to had a gloomy face. He waved his hand and said, "Send him down the mountain." They stared gloomily at the red figure. Because they knew that he was from the black market, they did not dare to openly make things difficult for him. A middle-aged man standing next to the pile of herbs on the stage gave each person a list of herbs and said in a deep voice, "Pick up the herbs on the list. The first 10 people to pick up all the herbs on the list will enter the next round. The rest will be eliminated. Begin." As soon as he finished speaking, the pharmacists on the stage picked up the herbs on the list in their hands and fought for the herbs on the table. When the teacher from the School of Stars and Clouds finished picking up the herbs and walked out, he could not help but glance to the side. He glanced at the young man in red who was holding the herb basket and frowned. Fengjiu turned his head slightly and smiled at him. Not long after, 10 people emerged victorious. After the others were eliminated, they immediately entered the final round of the competition. They had to concoct medicine on the spot. The higher the grade of the medicine, the less likely the winner would be. Looking at the dozens of herbs on the table, Fengjiu began to concoct them. Her concoction method was different from others. Even if others saw it, they wouldn't be able to learn it. That was because it was like a modern experiment. Layer by layer, it was processed and refined before it finally took shape. After she concocted a bottle of green liquid, she walked to the 8 appraisers of the Alchemist Association and placed the potion in front of them. "Please examine it. This is medicine. What a beautiful color." One of the female judges, who was in her 30s, looked at the half-filled bottle of medicine in amazement. She found it hard to believe. "Beautiful and elegant sister, this is indeed a potion. I'm not lying to anyone." She winked at her. Her seductive smile and smiling eyes made the 30-year-old female apothecary blush slightly, blush appearing on her face. Chapter 176. At this moment, Fengjiu tilted his head slightly, looked at Ling Mohan and asked with a smile, "Uncle Ling, why are you staring at me?" Hearing this, the female alchemist couldn't help but smile. She looked at Fengjiu with a gentle gaze. "Young man, why don't you tell me the effects of this bottle of medicine?" This bottle of medicine is a level 3 speed increasing medicine. As long as you consume it, your speed will increase by 10 times. Even if a martial practitioner is being chased by a martial master, as long as you drink this bottle of medicine, you will have enough speed to escape. Hearing this, everyone on and off the stage took in a breath of cold air. Pairs of eyes stared at the green bottle of medicine. If what he said was true, then this medicine wasn't as simple as a medicine. It was a bottle of spiritual liquid that could save lives at critical moment. Preposterous. The alchemist teacher from the School of Stars and Clouds walked over and placed the medicine on the table. He glanced at Fengjiu and said, "This is simply preposterous. I have been in contact with medicine for so many years, but I have never heard of a speed-increasing medicine. This is simply nonsense. That's right. Just based on your age and you are only a level 3 alchemist, you can tell that there is a limit to your medicine refining skills. Her casual words made the old alchemist so angry that his face turned red. He angrily pointed at her and said, You have no respect for your elders. You are simply arrogant and conceited. Ignorant. All right, stop arguing. This bottle of medicine is indeed a level 3 advanced medicine. The old alchemist in the middle opened his mouth. Everyone was silent. Even the alchemist teacher from the School of Stars and Clouds widened his eyes. President Yu, are you sure? This young man can refine a level 3 advanced medicine? Hearing this, President Yu was displeased. Elder Chen, are you doubting my appraisal skills? Seeing his displeasure, the alchemist teacher from the School of Stars and Clouds quickly adjusted his attitude and respectfully said, I don't dare. President Yu is the president of the Alchemist Guild. You are the authority of the alchemist world. Naturally, you are experienced and knowledgeable. I lost my sense of propriety, please don't blame me. As he spoke, he looked at Feng Jiu with a complicated gaze. He couldn't believe that he had lost to a young man. Ling Mohan's eyes moved slightly, and when his gaze fell on the young man in red, he narrowed his eyes slightly. When the president of the black market heard President Yu's words, he was so excited that tears almost fell from his eyes. It's actually a third-grade spirit liquid. It's actually a third-grade spirit liquid. He originally thought that there was no hope, but who would have thought that there would be such a pleasant surprise in the end? How could he not be excited? Just then, 16 people in black appeared. Among them, 10 were at the peak of the foundational level while the other 6 were in the golden core. The moment they appeared, a powerful chi permeated the air and engulfed the entire mountain. Hiss. They are from the Yang Palace. What? Were they from the Yang Palace? Run. Run. The people from Yang Dian are here. In a moment, the crowd was in a panic. Screams and shouts echoed throughout the mountain. Seeing that the situation was not good, Feng Jiu immediately rushed down the stage and shouted, Leng Shuang, run down the mountain quickly. Just as the word run left her mouth, a powerful chi came down on her, causing her body to stiffen. In the next moment, she felt a pain at the back of her neck and she lost consciousness and fell down. Master. Chapter 177. Ling Mohan chased after him, but came back not long after. He apologized to the crowd. The other party came quickly and left quickly as well. I can't see his whereabouts anymore. The people from the Alchemist Guild all shook their heads when they heard this. President Yu sighed, it's not your fault. The people from Yang Dian have always been elusive and powerful. I'm afraid that the young man was targeted by them because of his talent in alchemy. What kind of power is Yang Dian? Will my master be in danger? Leng Shuang came in front of them and asked anxiously. The president of the black market walked over and said, Yang Dian's power is even greater than the black market. Regardless of whether it's the School of Stars and Clouds or the various clans, they are a power that no one can afford to offend. That Yama Lord is even more mysterious. No one knows where Yang Dian's base is. Little brother Ghost Doctor has fallen into their hands. I'm afraid that things are not looking good for him. No. My master will be fine. She shouted loudly and looked coldly at the president of the black market. Your black market has to help me find my master. Don't worry, we will find out where your master is. President Ku did not decline this point. You can rest assured. According to what I know, Yang Dian has recently captured many alchemists and pharmacists. Perhaps, your master will not be in danger. The president of the Alchemist Guild sighed as he said this. A good elixir competition was originally meant to select talents, but who knew that the people from Yang Dian would turn it into this? The news spread like a feather in the wind, causing people to sigh endlessly. Everyone was guessing whether the red-robed young man was alive or dead. And, as night fell, a black figure silently arrived at a house in a few leaps. Greetings to the Yama Lord. The 16 black-robed cultivators in the courtyard respectfully knelt down on one knee. Rise. A low and cold voice containing a powerful aura came out. He brushed his robes and sat down at the stone table in the courtyard. As he turned and sat down, his face was also revealed. It was an astonishingly handsome face. His facial features seemed to have been carefully carved by the heavens, and the contours of his face were as sharp as a knife. He was cold and hard, but he did not lose his handsomeness. Under his sharp eyebrows, there was a pair of deep eyes that contained a mysterious light, containing a sharp and intimidating edge. With just a glance, it made people involuntarily lower their heads, not daring to meet his intimidating black eyes that contained a powerful pressure and sharpness. And under that high nose, his thin sexy lips. They were slightly pursed and his whole body emitted a cold and intimidating aura, noble like a god, but also like the king of the world. If Feng Jiu at this moment. That's right, the master of Yang Dian, the Yama Lord, was Ling Mohan, whom Feng Jiu was familiar with. Ling Mohan was only a fake identity he used to enter Xingyun as a teacher. The beard on his face was also carefully pasted on, enough to pass off as the real thing. "How is he?" the Yama Lord asked in a low voice. His low voice revealed a trace of laziness and the aura of a superior. Replying to the Yama Lord, "The boy we caught is still unconscious. He hasn't woken up," a black-robed cultivator said respectfully. "Take good care of him. Tomorrow, follow me back to Yang Dian." Hearing this, the 16 black-robed cultivators were all delighted. "Master is going back to Yang Dian." Chapter 178. When the 16 of them heard this, they immediately flew toward the back. Seeing this, the Yama Lord stood up. Just as he was about to walk toward the back, he stopped in his tracks and rubbed his chin. Then, he took out half of the silver mask from the space and put it on before he walked toward the back. When he reached the back, he saw that the red figure on the roof was circling around his subordinates like a ghost. The speed at which he retreated and the ferocious attacks made the Yama Lord's eyes light up. When they were at the top of the mountain, the Yama Lord had knocked him out when he was unprepared. Now that he was on guard, the 2 Foundation establishment cultivators under him were unable to take him down. He had to admit that he had impressed the Yama Lord once again. Unfortunately, it was impossible for him to escape now that he had fallen into his hands. Hiss. One of the Foundation establishment cultivators in black was kicked by Feng Jiu. He took a few steps back and rubbed his aching chest as he cursed under his breath. "Fuck. What did you eat growing up? Why are your legs so strong?" Feng Jiu retracted his leg and threw a punch at another Foundation establishment cultivator who was approaching him. He sneered, "Of course I grew up drinking breast milk." Hearing this, the Yama Lord, who was standing below with his hands behind his back, smirked. His deep gaze landed on the red figure and he ordered, "Take him down." "Yes." The Golden Core stage cultivators who were watching from the side immediately responded. 2 of them flew out, and a strong pressure enveloped the area. With one move, they captured Feng 9. "Fuck. Not only are you bullying me with numbers, but you're also bullying me." Hiss. "This is so awkward. My hands." She screamed in pain and glared at them in anger. This was the difference in strength. In this world, the strong were respected. Even if her strength was considered one of the best in the country of Glorious Sun, she was still vulnerable in the face of these powerful cultivators in a mid-tier 6-tier country. In the face of such a strong opponent, she knew that she could not escape, but she still wanted to try. As expected, her hands were twisted behind her back. Hiss. Usually, he didn't feel any pain when he twisted other people's hands. Why did he feel as if his bones and tendons were about to be dislocated when he was twisted in the opposite direction? "Master, we've captured her." 2 Golden Core cultivators held her captive in front of the Yama Lord. Feng Jiu raised her head and saw the man in a black robe with dark patterns standing in front of her with his hands behind his back. Although the other party's face was covered by half a silver mask, revealing only his sexy thin lips below his nose and his cold and hard chin, but his slender and strong physique, his strong and straight figure, and the aura he exuded, still made her eyes light up. At that moment, she whistled like a rich playboy and praised, "What a sexy and seductive man." Seeing him act like a hoodlum in front of their master in front of everyone, the 16 black-clothed cultivators were stunned. They quickly glanced at their master and quickly lowered their heads to hide the uncontrollable smile on their faces. A sexy and alluring man. Talking about their master? This young man probably doesn't want to live anymore. When the Yama Lord heard Fengzhou's words, he raised his eyebrows and the corners of his mouth curled into a wicked smile. Sexy. Seductive. Maybe I can take it as a compliment. However, no matter how one listened to it, that low and magnetic languid voice seemed to contain a fatal danger. Praise beauty. Chapter 179. At this moment, Fengzhou was slightly startled. She stared at the man in front of her and thought to herself, why does this voice sound so familiar? Could it be that I've seen this person somewhere before? That's impossible. This man's aura was so outstanding. If she had seen him before, she definitely wouldn't have forgotten him. Just as she was thinking, she suddenly saw the man in front of her shoot out a few streams of air. She felt her entire body go limp and she fell to the ground. Lock him up. If he escapes, I'll hold you responsible, the Yama Lord ordered in a deep voice. He flicked his sleeves and turned to leave. Yes. The 16 black-clothed cultivators respectfully responded and pulled up the youth who had fallen to the ground. After her body went limp, she felt that the Xian energy in her body had been sealed. Fengzhou's heart skipped a beat. She said, my Xian energy has been sealed by your master. You don't have to pull me, I can walk on my own. Moreover, with you all guarding me, how can I escape? I advise you not to think about escaping. If you try to escape again, I'll break your legs. One of the cultivators threatened. He released her hand and said, let's go. Fengzhou, who was locked up in the room again, knew that she couldn't escape and didn't have any other thoughts. However, only she knew that the man had only sealed her Xian energy. He didn't know that she had spiritual energy in her body. In this way, as long as she found the right opportunity, she might be able to escape. However, before that, she wanted to understand why these people had captured her. Yama Palace? She didn't remember offending such a power. The next morning, Fengzhou was brought onto a flying boat. When the flying boat left the ground and flew into the sky, Fengzhou, who was originally sitting inside, walked out. She saw the man sitting at the bow drinking wine and was about to walk over when she was stopped. Let him come over, the Yama Lord ordered without turning his head. Fengzhou walked over and sat down without hesitation. She poured herself a cup of wine and took a sip. She asked, whose life are you capturing me to save? Or are you coveting my alchemy skills? Although these people had a strong murderous aura, they didn't want to kill her. Otherwise, she wouldn't have survived until now. As for her, she reckoned that the only thing that could catch people's attention was her medical skills and alchemy skills. Seeing his casual and calm appearance, the Yama Lord's eyes revealed a look of admiration. Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you? If you wanted to kill him, you would have done so long ago. She touched her stomach and asked the guard, hey, is there anything to eat? Give me some food, I haven't eaten anything since yesterday. The guard glanced at Yang Zhu, and after receiving his signal, he walked into the spaceship. Not long after, he brought out a few plates of pastries and placed them on the small table. Yama's, the Yama Lord's eyes, eat slowly, there's more, there's, of the Yama of Yama, Yayama. Cough, cough, cough. It would have been better if he hadn't spoken, but as soon as he spoke, Fengzhou was so shocked that she choked. The pastry was stuck in her throat, unable to go up or down, and her disfigured face flushed red. The Yama Lord frowned. He watched as Fengzhou poured a cup of water from her chest and gulped it down. She took a deep breath and glared at him. Chapter 180. His black pupils turned, and he saw that the subordinates of the Golden Core cultivators were also looking at him in astonishment. He frowned and swept his gaze over them. What are you standing there for? Don't you have anything else to do? Leave. Yes. The Golden Core cultivators hurriedly responded. As they retreated, they glanced at the red-robed youth. They really couldn't tell what was so special about this youth. How could he make their master so gentle? Fengzhou glanced at him, then ignored him and continued to eat the pastries. This time, he ate more slowly. Moreover, A trace of doubt flashed through his half-closed eyes. Why did that voice sound so familiar? Where had she heard this person's voice before? In the evening, the flying ship stopped on a flat ground. After the Yama Lord got off the flying ship, she followed closely behind. However, her eyes were soon covered by some black cloth. He was led by them all the way, and after a long journey, he heard many people calling out respectfully to welcome the King of Hell back. Take him to change his clothes and send him to the medicine pavilion. After hearing the Yama Lord's voice, she was led to a room. A cultivator removed the black cloth covering her eyes and threw a set of grey robes to her. Quickly change and come with me. Seeing the cultivator standing in the room and staring at her, she glared at him. Get out. How can I change my clothes if you keep staring at me? We're all men, what's there to be afraid of? Hurry up and stop nagging. It was a golden core cultivator, a man in his 20s. He was also one of the 16 people who came back with them. His name was Hui Lang. I'm not used to being stared at. She frowned. You're so troublesome. If you don't change, I'll help you change. As he spoke, he really took large strides towards her and made a move to take off her clothes. However, before he could get close, Feng Jiu shouted at the top of his lungs, "Ah, molestation." The door was suddenly pushed open, and several cultivators outside poked their heads in. When they saw the situation in the room, they couldn't help but stare. Who's molesting who? One of them stared at the two people in the room for a moment, then smiled mischievously. He stared at the golden core cultivator and said, Hui Lang, I didn't expect you to have such a hobby. Scram. The golden core cultivator's face darkened. He glared at Feng Jiu and ordered, two of you, take off this brat's clothes. Hearing this, Feng Jiu's eyes narrowed. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and a smile bloomed on his lips. Take off my clothes. Come up and give it a try. Do you think I don't dare? Hui Lang stepped forward and reached out to pull his clothes. Feng Nine was not polite to him. Seeing him step forward, she immediately took advantage of his strength and threw him away. At the same time, she moved her fingers, and a silver needle with cold light pierced into the acupoint on his waist and abdomen at a speed that was too fast to be heard. Hiss. Unexpectedly thrown to the ground, Hui Lang's anger rose. He clenched his fist and was about to use his spiritual power when he heard a cold voice. Stop. Master. Seeing that it was the Yama Lord, everyone bowed their heads. The Yama Lord walked in with a frown. He coldly glanced at the two people and asked in a low voice, What's going on? I want to change my clothes, but he won't go out. He insists on staring at me and wants to take off my clothes. Chapter 181. Mistress, it's not like that, Hui Lang said anxiously. Then what is it? Feng Jiu crossed her arms and glanced at him from the corner of her eyes. Do you dare say that you didn't want to watch me change? Do you dare say that you didn't want to take off my clothes? You. What about me? Although this young master's face is ruined, my eyes are still very picky. With your washboard-like body and your pretty boy face, you really can't enter this young master's eyes. Her face was full of disdain and her words were light as a feather, but the words that came out of her mouth made everyone in the room fall silent. They all stared at her as if they were staring at a monster. Even the grey wolf widened his eyes, his face full of astonishment. The Yama Lord's mouth twitched imperceptibly. He looked at the young man's self-righteous and shameless expression and couldn't help but look away. He turned and walked out. Hurry up and change your clothes, Hui Lang said fiercely, then quickly turned and left. When the others saw this, they all looked at Feng Jiu curiously. They were very surprised. They really couldn't tell that this young man was gay. Seeing them leave one by one, Feng Jiu stepped forward and closed the door. She couldn't help but smile. She looked at the grey robe in her hand and quickly changed into it before walking out. Follow me. Hui Lang looked at Feng Jiu with disgust and walked in front to lead the way. Feng Jiu glanced outside. There were only a few cultivators left. As for the Yama Lord, he was nowhere to be seen. Her gaze fell on Hui Lang in front of her and a faint light flashed in her eyes. She pursed her lips and walked leisurely behind him until they arrived at the courtyard of a 7-story building. The strong smell of various herbs assailed her nostrils. Many people were busy in the large courtyard. Some were drying herbs, some were grinding herbs, and some were classifying herbs. Everyone had a different division of labor. Moreover, these people seemed to be used to newcomers coming in every once in a while. Therefore, when a disfigured youth came in, many of them only raised their heads to take a glance at him in their busy work and continued with their work. There were even some who didn't even look in his direction. "Elder Lin, I'll leave this kid to you," Grey Wolf shouted. He left Feng Ju behind and didn't even look at Feng Ju. At this time, an old man in green walked out of the building. He looked at Feng Zhou and asked, "What's your name?" Feng Zhou grinned and said loudly, "Ghost." "Ghost?" The old man was stunned and frowned. "What do you know? Tell me, I'll arrange a job for you." Feng Zhou didn't answer him. "What are you all doing here? Don't ask what you shouldn't ask. Otherwise, you'll die very quickly." Hearing this, she raised her eyebrows and thought for a moment, "Then arrange for me to do odd jobs. I still know how to be an assistant." As she spoke, she looked into the building and saw that there seemed to be many people on the first floor. That's where the herbs are mixed. The newcomers are all doing odd jobs in the outer courtyard. You can go there and classify the herbs first. The old man gestured and turned to go back to the first floor. Feng Zhou looked inside and walked to the herbs. As she sorted the herbs, she looked around. Chapter 182. Feng Nine glanced at him and casually put away a medicinal herb. She said, "He was caught." "Caught? Are you a pharmacist?" The young man asked in surprise. "Why do you say that?" Feng Zhou raised his eyebrows. The young man glanced inside and said in a low voice, "Every once in a while, someone will be caught and brought in. However, those who are caught are all pharmacists." "Ah, they are all in the building. Those of us outside are at most apprentice pharmacists who do odd jobs. If they are all in there, how do you know that they are all pharmacists?" "That's because a man kept making a ruckus last time. That's how we found out." "Oh." She nodded and did not ask anything else. In her heart, she was thinking, what is this Yama Palace trying to do by setting up such a medicine building and capturing so many pharmacists? On the other side, in the study of the main courtyard. "Master, the others are waiting in the main hall," Hui Lang reported respectfully. The Yama Lord, who was sitting at his desk, looked at Hui Lang and asked, "Have you made arrangements for him?" Hearing this, Hui Lang could not help but look up at him. When he met his cold and majestic gaze, he quickly lowered his head and replied, "Yes, your subordinate brought that kid to the medicine building and handed him over to Elder Lin." The King of Hell put down the brush in his hand as a powerful aura filled the air. His deep voice was cold as he said, "His ability to refine medicine is not bad. The medicines that have been circulating in the black market for the past few months have all come from his hands. I seem to have already told you about this." Feeling the pressure from his body, the atmosphere in the room became colder. Hui Lang was shocked and knelt down on one knee. "Master, please calm down. Your subordinate only wanted to make that kid suffer a little. Your subordinate will immediately bring him into the building." He originally thought that his master only said to bring him to the medicine building and did not say to bring him into the building. That was why he wanted to take advantage of this loophole to break the kid's spirit. He never thought that his master would ask about it. "You've been by my side for a few years now. You should know that I don't like people who play tricks. If there's a next time, you'll have to go back to the Black Dungeon for training." Hearing the cold voice, Hui Lang was so shocked that he broke out in a cold sweat. Yes. This subordinate will definitely remember this and not commit it again. Black prison, that was really a hell, he did not want to go back there. The Yama Lord withdrew his pressure and leaned back. He glanced at Hui Lang, who was kneeling on the ground, and paused for a moment. Then he said, "That young man is indeed cunning. Let him stay in the medicine house for a few days." "Yes," Hui Lang answered. He didn't even dare to breathe loudly. When night fell, Feng Zhou followed them to the courtyard where they were resting. When he saw the row of large beds, he could not help but be dumbfounded. We're sleeping here tonight? Heavens! It couldn't be, right? She had to sleep with a bunch of men? If her father and grandfather knew about this, They would probably be hopping mad. Otherwise, do you think there's a separate room? A big man next to him glanced at him. He took off his clothes and said, "It's already good enough to have you to sleep with." Looking at the dozen or 20 people in the room, some took off their clothes, some took off their shoes, and some simply slept with their upper bodies bare. Feng Jiu frowned and turned to leave. What a joke. Let her sleep here. She was not going to sleep. After leaving the room, she looked around the courtyard. Seeing that there were guards outside the courtyard, she could not go out. Thus, her gaze turned and fell on the big tree in the courtyard. Her eyes lit up. Chapter 183. When the guards in black heard the commotion behind them, they turned around and saw the young man climbing up the tree on all fours. One of them shouted, "What are you doing? Come down." Feng Jiu glanced at the two of them and said, "Stay on guard and don't meddle in other people's business." "You." The guard in black was about to step forward when he was pulled back by the person next to him. "That kid is very strange. Don't bother about him. He didn't go out anyways. Let him be." The guard in black saw that Feng Jiu had found a place to sleep on the tree and couldn't help but scold. He didn't sleep on a good bed but went to sleep on a tree. "I think this kid is sick." Feng Jiu couldn't be bothered to pay attention to them. She hadn't had a good rest since she was brought here. Although it was a little cold outside, it was still better than sleeping with 10 or 20 people inside. After spending 2 days in the courtyard, she had more or less figured out the rules of the medicine tower. Only pharmacists could enter the tower, and the higher the grade, the more valuable the medicine they could concoct, the better the status and treatment in the Yang Palace. Moreover, although many people were captured, because of the treatment, they gave up the idea of leaving and wholeheartedly stayed in the medicine tower. It was said that as long as one could concoct a more valuable medicine, in addition to the proper reward, they could also find a beauty in the beauty tower to have fun with for a night. As long as one was sincerely loyal to the Yang Palace, they would be allowed to return home every once in a while. As for the beauty tower, it was said that the Yang Palace had nurtured it to be an information network. The Yang Palace had beauty towers in various places, similar to brothels. The beauties in the beauty tower were gathered from all over the place. Each of them had exquisite and enchanting figures and beautiful faces. Even those old-fashioned pharmacists would be intoxicated by the gentle fragrance of the beauties once they went in. For the first time, she was curious about the master of the Yang Palace. What kind of person was the Yama Lord? "What are you thinking about?" A low and magnetic voice suddenly sounded in her ear. This made her, who was in a daze, answer without thinking, "I'm thinking about what kind of man the Yama Lord is." As soon as she said that, the shadow guards who were guarding the secret corner of the medicine tower twitched their lips. So this brat was actually thinking about their master in broad daylight. His guts were really big. The bustling sounds in the courtyard suddenly quieted down. Everyone looked at him strangely. When their gazes fell on the man beside him, everyone hurriedly withdrew their gazes and continued with their own matters. Feng Jiu came back to his senses. When he saw the man standing beside him, his eyes lit up and he grinned. "Hey, so it's the Yama Lord. I haven't seen you for a few days and you seem to have become even more handsome." The Yama Lord's deep eyes fell on his scarred face. He looked at the heartless smile on his face and said in a deep voice, "Come in with me." Then, he walked into the building with his hands behind his back. Seeing this, Feng Jiu quickly followed. When he took a step, he caught a glimpse of Hui Lang's haggard expression from the corner of his eye. He couldn't help but smile happily. Hui Lang didn't seem to hear Feng Jiu's words. His expression was a little absent-minded and there was anxiety in his eyes. He had dark circles under his eyes and his face was a little ugly. Chapter 184. This is where the pharmacists concoct the medicine. There's another floor on the second floor. As for the third floor, there are some books on medicine. The fourth and fifth floors are for medicinal herbs. The sixth and seventh floors are for finished medicines. The Yama Lord spoke in a low voice as he walked. He brought Feng Jiu to a room inside and said, "This lord had people kidnap you because I want to use your talent in refining medicine to research a medicine that can suppress the cold poison. As long as you can develop it, This lord can guarantee your safe return. Cold poison? Hearing this, she was a little surprised. She thought of the 1,000-year cold poison in Uncle Ling's body. But why did this Yama lord also want a medicine to cure the cold poison? That's right. Other than the pharmacists here who are researching the antidote for the cold poison, there are also some who are refining medicine for our Yama palace. As long as you work seriously, this lord will not mistreat anyone. But if you cause trouble here, this lord will not let you off easily. Feng Zhou glanced at him and said, "This is not so easy to develop. There are many kinds of cold poison, and the symptoms are different. If you don't feel the pulse or check the body's condition, which pharmacist would dare to casually concoct medicine?" She spread out her hands, shook her head and sat down at the table. "If I don't feel the pulse or see the body, I can't concoct the medicine." The Yama lord stared at him for a long time in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. He stood up and said, "Then you should first familiarize yourself with this place. When the quality of your medicine is higher than the pharmacists in the medicine hall, we'll talk about this." Seeing that he was about to leave, Feng Zhou quickly reached out and grabbed his sleeve, shouting, "Wait." The Yama lord frowned and turned around. His gaze fell on the fair little hand that grabbed his sleeve. His eyes flashed and he coldly shouted, "Let go." With a flick of his sleeve, he flicked his hand away and pulled back his sleeve. Feng Zhou did not care and said, "Yama lord, you guys captured me, but you didn't even prepare a place for me to sleep. You want me to squeeze in with others, don't you feel embarrassed? Also, my Xian energy has also been sealed by you. Your security here is so tight, are you afraid that I will run away? You don't have to make it so that I can't even leave the courtyard all day, right?" She glanced at him. Seeing that he didn't leave, she continued, "Since you invited me here to concoct the medicine, you should treat me like a VIP. Go and ask around, those people in the black market treat me like a grandfather. Tell me, compared to others, isn't your hospitality a little too poor?" Elder Lin and Grey Wolf couldn't help but glance at him when they saw that he wasn't afraid of death and was talking about hospitality to the King of Hell. They felt that he was indulging in fantasy. After all, he was a prisoner. How could he talk about hospitality? However, what surprised them the most was that the Yama master's tolerance towards this brat had exceeded their expectations time and time again. The Yama king swept a glance at the young man's angry face and instructed, "Grey Wolf, arrange a small independent courtyard for him later. He will be free to move about in the Yama palace." "Yes." Hui Lang glanced at Feng Zhou. He did not understand why his master treated him so well. Seeing his master walk out, Hui Lang called out and said softly, "Master, you go back first. I am not feeling well. I will find a doctor in the building." The Yama lord glanced back at him and replied, "Okay." Fat. Feng Zhou could not help but laugh. Looking at the anxious Hui Lang, he shook his head and looked at him mockingly. Chapter 185. As soon as he said that, the Yama lord, who was walking out in front, stopped in his tracks. He turned around and glanced at Hui Lang, who was staring at him with a murderous look in his eyes. His deep gaze met the youth's sly and smiling gaze. Erectile dysfunction? The low and magnetic voice once again landed on Hui Lang's body. His gaze swept down from his angry and embarrassed face and stopped at a certain place below his waist. The corner of his mouth curled into an imperceptible smile. Needless to say, it must be the youth's masterpiece. So it was erectile dysfunction. No wonder Hui Lang had become so haggard and anxious in the past 2 days. It's you, isn't it?" Hui Lang glared at Feng Zhou. He clenched his fists tightly and released a murderous aura. Unfortunately, Feng Zhou was not afraid of his murderous gaze at all. Instead, she raised her chin and glanced at him. "What do you mean it's me? What does your erectile dysfunction have to do with me? Don't forget, I'm the famous ghost doctor. If I can't even see this problem of yours, it'll be too much of a disgrace to my reputation." Hearing that, Hui Lang suppressed a bellyful of anger. Looking at the strange gazes from the surrounding people, he only felt that he had lost all face, but he couldn't do anything to that person. Cough. The Yama lord coughed and said, "Since your erectile dysfunction, you have to be treated." There are many doctors and pharmacists in the building. Let them take a look. As he spoke, he walked out. Feng Jiu glanced at Hui Lang with a smile and followed him out. When she arrived outside, she saw the Yama Lord standing outside the courtyard. Thus, she walked up and asked with a smile, "Yama Lord, you weren't waiting for me, were you?" He turned around and looked at the youth who only reached his chest. He said in a low voice, "This is the Hall of Hell. Don't forget your status. Don't go overboard. Otherwise, this lord will take care of it for you." Feng Jiu pursed his lips as he watched him leave after giving him a warning. In the end, couldn't he just say that he was being protective? However, she also found it strange. No matter how she looked at it, this Yama Lord did not seem to be a good-tempered person who was easy to get along with, so why would he always give in to her? Let her mess around. In fact, what she didn't know was that because the Yama Lord had interacted with her as Uncle Ling, in his eyes, Feng Jiu was just a crafty and eccentric young man. However, this young man was a little too familiar with him. The way he called him Uncle Ling made him wonder if he was too old. But it was undeniable that he had no malice towards this young man. With the Yama Lord's instructions, Feng Jiu could freely walk around the Hall of Hell as long as it was not a forbidden area. Thus, in less than half a day, she had thoroughly explored the inside and outside of the Hall of Hell. Among them, there were many places that were set up with formations. She did not set foot in them. However, she found a good place. There was a hot spring at the back of the mountain. It was said that it was the Yama Lord's private territory. Outsiders were not allowed to enter. She only took a look outside and left because there was also a formation set up there. After walking around, she returned to the medicine tower again. She walked around the third and fourth floor where medicinal herbs were stored. Suddenly, she couldn't move her feet away. She couldn't find all the spiritual herbs that she had asked the black market to help her find. However, she didn't expect that this medicine house had everything. At that moment, she excitedly picked up some spiritual herbs and planned to concoct some scar-removing ointment. Chapter 186. Hearing this, Feng Jiu looked at Elder Lin with a serious face and said, "Of course these are for medicine. The Yama Lord said that he wants to concoct an antidote for cold poison, so I have to bring these back to study them." Hearing this, Elder Lin was a little confused, but these medicines aren't suitable as antidotes for cold poison. Elder Lin, you don't understand, do you? Every medicine has a counteracting effect. Although I haven't been able to concoct the antidote yet, I won't go wrong if I bring it back to study. She spoke with a serious face and a righteous attitude, scaring Elder Lin. Then, do you need anything else? There are medicinal tools in the medicine building. If you need anything, come find me. Hearing this, she smiled and narrowed her eyes. Elder Lin, you're such a good person. Don't worry, I'll come back again if I don't have enough medicine. I'll definitely look for you if I need any medicinal tools. Let's go. Take me to pick some for me to use. She patted Elder Lin's shoulder in a brotherly manner and went downstairs with him. That night, Feng Jiu was in her small courtyard making the scar-removing ointment. On the other side, in the main courtyard, Elder Lin was reporting to the Yama Lord about the medicines that Feng Jiu had taken from the medicine building today. Before he finished, he said, "It's just that I find it strange. Those medicines aren't for cold poison, but that Gui Gui said that they can be used." Gui Gui? The Yama Lord glanced at Elder Lin and raised his voice slightly. Elder Lin was stunned and thought to himself, why doesn't Master get the main point? He was reporting that those precious medicines had been taken by a young man, but his master didn't say anything for a long time. Instead, he reacted when he heard the young man's name. At that moment, he didn't dare to think any further and could only respectfully say, "Yes, that young man said that you can just call him Gui Gui. You're dismissed." The Yama Lord waved his hand, indicating for him to leave. "Master, those medicines. Give them to him if he wants them." "Yes." Hearing this, old Lin didn't say anything else. He bowed and left. After sitting for a while and drinking 2 cups of wine, he stood up and walked out. Originally, he was taking a stroll outside, but unknowingly, he had walked to the outside of the young man's courtyard. Seeing that the light in the room was still on, and the reflection of the figure on the window paper was moving back and forth, he was moved and walked in. In the room, Fengjiu was happily humming a tune as she applied the newly developed ointment to her face in front of the mirror. Thinking that it wouldn't take long for her beauty to recover, her depressed mood from being caught and brought here finally eased. "You took my medicine just to make this damned thing? Wow." Suddenly, a voice came from behind her, giving her a fright. She instinctively jumped up and turned around, only to see King Yang, who had entered at some point in time, standing there with his hands behind his back, looking at her with interest. "You can even scare someone like this? You must have done too many bad things." He raised his eyebrows and looked at the young man with the ointment on his face. Seeing that it was him, Fengjiu sighed and patted her chest. She said unhappily, "Yama Lord, what are you doing here in the middle of the night instead of sleeping? You can come here if you want, but what are you trying to do by silently floating in like a ghost? You can't scare people like this, right?" Chapter 187. What's wrong? Why are you staring at me like that? She asked in confusion. At this moment, the Yama Lord's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the face covered in black and green ointment and saw those clever and cunning eyes. He suddenly understood. So it was her. It was that little girl in the Jufulin forest. It was the little girl who hugged his leg and called him brother-in-law and uncle. Moreover, she was the one who saved him when he was being hunted down by the cold poison. Thinking of this, a complicated look flashed across his eyes. He didn't expect to meet her again after so many twists and turns. Moreover, she had disguised herself as a man and fooled him. If he hadn't seen her face covered in black and green ointment and those eyes, he wouldn't have recognized her. Fengjiu, who felt uncomfortable under his gaze, frowned and said, "Yama Lord, it's so late. Why aren't you going back to sleep? Are you planning to stare at me here?" The Yama Lord's deep gaze swept past her chest, which was only wearing an inner garment. He saw that it was flat, without any rise or fall. However, in his mind, he inexplicably thought of the soft touch he had accidentally touched in the Jufulin forest. For a moment, his ears turned slightly red. He immediately turned and strode out. "That's ridiculous." Fengjiu saw him leave without saying anything. She only felt that this Yama Lord's temper was simply too strange. She followed, locked the door, and returned to the mirror to apply another layer of ointment. Then, she went to sleep with her ointment-smeared face. The next day, when Fengjiu came to the medicine house with her ointment-smeared face, Elder Lin couldn't help but welcome her in surprise. Gooey, what's on your face? Why didn't you wash your face before leaving?" "It's ointment. I can't wash it off." She grinned and said, "Elder Lin, I'm going to the 4th floor to pick medicine. Do you want to come with me?" "Picking medicine again? The ones you took away yesterday. Yesterday's concoction failed. Look, in order not to waste it, I put it all on my face." She pointed at the ointment on her face and smiled. This. Elder Lin was speechless. He really didn't know what to say. However, when he thought of the Yama Lord's attitude towards him and the Yama Lord's instructions, he couldn't help but sigh and say, "If you want to get the medicine, go get it yourself. I'll go back and register it. I still have things to do, so I won't follow you up." Fengjiu's eyes lit up. "Elder Lin, I didn't expect you to trust me so much. Aren't you afraid that I'll ruin those precious herbs?" Elder Lin thought to himself, "It's not that I trust you. It's just that the Yama Lord told you to take as much as you want. Only the Yama Lord would let you squander like this." Her gaze fell on his face. Thinking about how all the precious spiritual herbs he took yesterday had become ointment on his face, she suddenly felt her heart ache. What a wastrel! What a wastrel! Shaking his head, he went to do his own thing. Thus, Fengjiu went upstairs and took a lot of spiritual herbs back. He locked himself in his room and fiddled with them non-stop. In the evening, Hui Lang came looking for him with an ugly expression. On the other side, in the main courtyard, the Yama Lord held a cup of tea in his hand. His posture hadn't changed at all. No one knew what he was thinking. Sometimes he frowned, and sometimes he curled his lips into a faint smile. That strange appearance made the black-clothed cultivator beside him feel nervous. After taking a sip of the tea, He realized that it was cold. He put down the cup in his hand and asked, Yingyi, where did Hui Lang go? Master, Hui Lang went to see the ghost doctor. Chapter 188. On the other side, Fengjiu couldn't help but raise his eyebrows when he saw Hui Lang standing by the door with an ugly expression. He crossed his arms and asked with his chin raised, What's the matter? I'm here to treat your illness. He resisted the urge to kill and tried to speak in a calm voice. However, that stiff voice and that baleful aura still revealed the true feelings in his heart. Although I'm the ghost doctor, I can't treat just anyone's illness, she said casually with an infuriating smile on her face. Moreover, aren't you very powerful? Why would you need me to treat your illness? Hui Lang ground his teeth and stared at the infuriating youth in front of him. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have become like this. Hey, stop. She glanced at him and said, Don't talk nonsense. You wanted to become Uncle Rabbit, and you're blaming me for it. That's unreasonable. As she spoke, the corners of her lips curled. She looked him up and down and smiled wickedly. Actually, I think you're doing quite well now. Since you can't get hard, why don't you just obediently be the lower one? Why waste your energy to treat your illness? Hui Lang was extremely embarrassed by her explicit words, but he couldn't do anything about it. He could only grit his teeth and ask, What do you want in order to treat me? She looked at the red-eyed Hui Lang and said with an evil expression, Men can't always be hard. It's healthy to be soft, understand? Seeing his face turn red from holding his breath, she touched her chin and said with a look of realization, I know. No problem. Leave your illness to me. I'll make sure you're satisfied. However, shouldn't we talk about the payment? Seeing that she had relented, Hui Lang secretly sighed in relief and asked, What do you want? I heard from Elder Lin that you once received 2 top-grade pearls the size of eggs. Master gave them to me. He glared. Those were his treasures. Hearing this, she raised her eyebrows. So you want to immortalize them? As soon as she said this, Hui Lang was immediately discouraged. He glared at the hateful youth in front of him and took out 2 top-grade pearls the size of eggs from the space ring on his finger and handed them to him. Take them. Weighing the 2 ultra-quality pearls in her hand, she narrowed her eyes with a smile and walked inside, saying, Come in. Take off your shirt and sit on the chair. Grey Wolf was not pretentious. After entering, he took off his coat and sat down on a chair. TSK, I couldn't tell. Her figure is not bad. Her gaze swept past the well-defined muscles on his body and went to his back. She took out a few silver needles and inserted them into the acupuncture points on his waist. Done. That's it. He was a little dumbfounded. He had only been stabbed twice, and he was already fine. What? You don't believe me? She glanced at him and grinned. Hehe, there's no need to rush. You can go back. I promise you'll see the effect tomorrow morning. At this time, Hui Lang didn't see the sly and evil smile on her face. Otherwise, he wouldn't have believed her so easily. Just as Grey Wolf doubtfully put on his shirt and tied his belt, a figure suddenly walked in. That sharp and intimidating gaze fell on him like ice, causing him to feel as if his entire body was frozen, not daring to move an inch. Even his voice had a trace of panic and trembling because of the other party's cold and intimidating pressure. Chapter 189. The Yama Lord's sharp and cold eyes fell on Hui Lang's hands, which were tied with the belt. His eyes were like cold knives, which made people feel cold. Did you cure him? His deep black eyes fell on Fengjiu, and his voice was low and steady, which made people unable to guess what he was thinking. Fengjiu blinked and nodded, yes. He looked at him strangely, feeling that these 2 people were a little crazy. Took off your clothes. His gaze once again landed on the stiff Grey Wolf. His voice was already faintly tinged with a dangerous aura. Yes, I took off my clothes. Fengjiu nodded obediently again. How could he do the acupuncture without taking off his clothes? Of course he had to take off his clothes. So, you also saw it. His voice was like an ice drop, which made Hui Lang break out in a cold sweat. He thought to himself, did I do something to make my master unhappy? Or did I violate some taboos? Of course, how could I do the acupuncture without seeing it? She also felt a little strange, especially when she felt the temperature of the whole room drop suddenly, as if there was a cold air whistling around her, which was very strange. An unknown flame rose in the Yama master's heart when he saw the confused look on her face. He took a deep look at her before he brushed his robes and turned around to leave. At the same time, his low and deep voice was filled with a cold and dangerous aura as it rang out in a furious manner. Ying Yi, throw Hui Lang to the Cool Breeze gang for me. Ying Yi, who was chasing after them, was stunned when he heard this. The Cool Breeze gang? He looked inside and saw Hui Lang, who was also stunned, standing there stiffly, with a look of disbelief on his face. Feng Jiu was stunned for a moment. He looked at the two of them and saw the look of disbelief on their faces. He couldn't help but blink and asked curiously, "What is the Cool Breeze gang?" Unexpectedly, it would have been better if she hadn't asked. Once she did, Grey Wolf broke down and rushed out. Master, I don't want to go to the Cool Breeze gang. Master. Seeing Hui Lang rushing out, Ying Yi came to his senses and hurriedly chased after him. If he didn't carry out his master's order, not only would Hui Lang be thrown to the Cool Breeze gang, but he would also be implicated. Therefore, it was better to have one dead than two dead. He could only let Hui Lang down. Feng Jiu stood at the door, listening to Hui Lang's ghost-like wails and wolf-like howls. He couldn't help but frown, thinking to himself, what kind of place is the Cool Breeze gang? It actually made Hui Lang's expression change. But why did the Yama Lord come? And why did you leave in a fit of anger? She muttered to herself. Since she couldn't figure it out, she decided not to think about it anymore. She returned to her room and closed the door, continuing her unfinished business. The next day, when she gave the 4th grade medicine to Elder Lin, she looked at his surprised and excited expression and couldn't help but giggle. Elder Lin, let me ask you something. Ha ha ha, what is it? Tell me. Elder Lin put away the medicine like it was a treasure and planned to show it to his master later. What is the Cool Breeze gang? She took a piece of cake from his table and ate it. The Cool Breeze gang is a small brothel. Why do you ask? He stayed in the medicine building all day yesterday, so he didn't know that Hui Lang was thrown to the Cool Breeze gang by the Yama Lord's order. Ahem. What? Small brothel? Chapter 190. Seeing Feng Jiu laughing so happily, Elder Lin shook his head and said, "Go upstairs and get whatever medicine you want. I'll bring the medicine to Master first." With that, he walked out, leaving Feng Jiu alone in the room, laughing happily. Elder Lin came to the main courtyard and saw that Hui Lang, who was always by his master's side, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, Ying Yi was guarding his master's courtyard. Elder Lin asked, "Ying Yi, why haven't I seen Hui Lang today?" Hearing this, Ying Yi's mouth twitched. He looked inside and said in a low voice, "Hui Lang is receiving guests in the Qingfeng gang." What? Elder Lin was startled and shouted, "The Qingfeng gang is receiving guests?" Did he hear wrongly? Ying Yi made a shushing gesture and pointed inside, telling him not to speak too loudly. Elder Lin wiped his cold sweat and said, "I have something to discuss with my master. I'll go in first." In front of the desk, the Yama Lord was reading the news from all over the world. At this time, there was a knock on the door and Elder Lin's voice came from outside. "Master, I have something to report. Come in." Elder Lin took a deep breath and walked in. When he saw the black figure busying himself in front of the desk, he walked forward and respectfully bowed before presenting the medicine. "Master, this is the medicine that Gui Gui has just made. I've seen it and it's a 4th grade medicine." Hearing this, the Yama Lord put down the information in his hand and looked up. "She made a 4th grade medicine?" "Yes, and it's a 4th grade medicine. Even in our medicine hall, there hasn't been a 4th grade medicine." Speaking of this, Elder Lin was a little excited. He didn't expect that Gui Gui, an ordinary-looking young man, to be so capable. No wonder his master treated him differently. The Yama Lord pondered for a while and said, "Later, ask her to brand her subordinate's mark on the bottle. Then, send the medicine to the auction house and let them sell it as the famous medicine of the ghost doctor." Hearing this, Elder Lin was startled, Master, you want to make the ghost doctor famous? If someone from Yangdian handled the treatment, the name of the ghost doctor would spread throughout the entire Qingtang kingdom in less than 3 months. Go and do it. He didn't say much and just waved his hand, indicating for him to leave. Yes. Elder Lin bowed and retreated. On the other side, in the cool breeze in. Hui Lang, who was hiding in the room, glanced at his lower body, gnashed his teeth and cursed, "You bastard. I knew that he wouldn't treat me so easily." As expected, he's up to no good. At this moment, the door was pushed open and a fair and delicate man walked in. He glanced at Hui Lang's erect part and couldn't help but reveal a mischievous smile. "Hui Lang, why are you so conflicted? It's hard for others to keep the golden spear intact, but you're different. Look, how long has it been? And he's still so strong. His endurance really leaves us in the dust." Hui Lang glared at him and said, "You're still laughing? Why don't you help me think of a way? Aren't we brothers? It's not like there's no way." The man walked over with a smile and said, "You know what kind of place this is. We don't lack prostitutes. Why don't I find you a couple to relieve your lust? Stop fooling around. I'm so annoyed," he said unhappily. "All right then." The man clapped his hands. Then, a few prostitutes came in with an almost transparent red silk robe and rouge. Chapter 191. The man laughed maliciously. "Of course I'm carrying out my master's orders. Do you really think that I'll let you hide in your room forever? Hey, Ren Xiong, don't go too far. I'm only carrying out my master's orders, I won't go too far. Don't worry, I'll take care of you and won't let you lose your virginity." He smiled and waved his hand, indicating for the servants to come forward and change his clothes. "I'll change it myself. I don't need them," Hui Lang shouted, but when he picked up the thin red clothes, his face was as black as a casserole. You want me to wear this? This is clearly transparent." Ren Xiong glanced at him and laughed. "You can also choose to go out naked. I believe that with you as the star, business will be booming these few days." Just like that, Fire Wolf was forced to change into the translucent red clothes, put on some makeup, and sent to the stage. On the other side, Fengjiu, who had heard that Yama Lord had gone out, slipped into the hot spring at the back of the mountain to take a bath. To her, the hot spring at the back of the mountain was safer than her courtyard. People could enter her courtyard whenever they wanted, and they didn't even knock on the door. She was always on tenterhooks when she took a bath, so how could it compare to the comfortable hot spring where no one dared to barge in? After soaking in the hot spring for more than an hour, she put on her clothes and took out an ointment from her space to apply on her face. During this period of time, her face was covered with ointment no matter if it was day or night. She had seen that the scar on her face had faded a lot, and it would probably disappear completely after a while. After applying the ointment, she quietly left the hot spring at the back of the mountain and returned to her courtyard. When she returned to her room, she locked all the windows and doors, blew out the lights, and entered the space to cultivate her spiritual energy. During this period of time, she didn't have much opportunity to cultivate here. After all, if she wasn't careful, she could be discovered at any time that she had a space treasure and spiritual energy. After entering the space, she looked at the sleeping fire phoenix. Seeing that it showed no signs of waking up, she sat down cross-legged and silently chanted the chi condensation manual to cultivate, until the second half of the night, the commotion outside woke her up in the space. She quickly flashed out of the space and appeared on the bed. She heard the room door suddenly being pushed open. Gooey. Hurry up and come with me." Elder Lin anxiously went forward to pull her away. "Elder Lin?" Fengjiu looked at him in astonishment and asked, "What's wrong? Where are you going in the middle of the night?" "Yama Lord went to the Poison Valley to steal the Heaven's Heart Flame Lotus." "Hurry, come with me." Because he knew that his master's medical skills were exceptional, when he found out that his master was injured, he immediately rushed over and pulled him along. Hearing this, Fengjiu's hearts. "How did you get hurt?" Although he said that, he still picked up the coat by the bed and put it on before following Elder Lin out. "How would you know what kind of place the Poison Valley is? It's filled with poisonous creatures. Moreover, The master of the Poison Valley is a nascent soul cultivator, and he's an expert in poisons. No matter how strong master is, it's inevitable that he'll be injured. Fengjiu followed Elder Lin to the main courtyard, which belonged to Yama Lord. This was her first time here. Elder Lin brought Fengjiu into the room and asked worriedly, Yingyi? How's master? Where is he injured? Is it serious? Yama Lord, who was lying on the bed naked and letting Yingyi treat his wound, turned his head and saw a figure following Elder Lin in. He immediately pulled up the blanket and covered himself with it. At the same time, his low and cold voice carried a trace of imperceptible embarrassment and anger. Chapter 192. Before Fengjiu could see what was going on, she felt a strong gust of wind and was pushed out. She was not the only one who was stunned. Yingyi and Elder Lin, who were treating his wound, were also stunned. Master, let her out, the Yama Lord said calmly. Yingyi saw this and quickly walked out. He said to the stunned Fengjiu, you go out first. Fengjiu poked her head out and was about to take a peek inside to see what was going on when she heard his voice again. Yingyi, throw her out. Seeing this, Fengjiu immediately slipped out. She muttered unhappily, I didn't ask for it. What's the point of drinking? It's simply baffling. Elder Lin hurriedly walked inside and asked, where is master hurt? The back of his thigh was bitten by a poisonous snake. I've already treated the wound and forced the poison out. Master has also taken a detoxification pill. It should be fine. But his arm was cut. He probably won't be able to move much for a few days. Yingyi looked at the Yama Lord and said, Master, the wound hasn't been treated yet. Hearing this, the Yama Lord lifted the blanket and revealed the wound on the back of his thigh near his buttocks. Because it was a poisonous snake bite, Yingyi made a small cross-shaped incision on the wound and let him use his qi to force the poison out. He was about to apply the medicine when they barged in. But they were all men. Why did Master chase the ghost doctor out? He had doubts in his heart, but he didn't dare to ask. He retreated to the side and let Elder Lin take over. After applying medicine, he bandaged the wound. Only then did he put on his pants, tie his belt, and treat the wound on his arm. Outside the courtyard, Fengjiu sat in the courtyard and looked at the stars. She wondered how Lung Shuang was doing. He didn't know where she was. He must be worried to death. Thinking of this, she felt that it was time for her to sneak away. However, even though he had been here for a few days, he still couldn't figure out who this Yama Lord was. The sky-heart flaming lotus that he stole from the Poison Valley tonight was one of the most precious herbs needed to treat the 1,000-year frost poison. 1,000-year frost poison? The master of Yang Hall? There was also that bearded uncle. Could there be a connection between the three of them? Just as he was deep in thought, he heard Elder Lin's voice. Gooey Gooey, you're still here? Go back to sleep. Master is fine. He said apologetically. He thought it was a serious injury, so he dragged him along when he came over. He didn't expect that he would be chased out by his master. Elder Lin, the sky-heart flaming lotus is an essential spirit herb to cure the 1,000-year frost poison. The Yama Lord spent so much effort to steal it from the Poison Valley. Who is this person to the Yama Lord? This. Hehe, you'll know in the future. Elder Lin chuckled and said, it's late. If you don't go back to sleep, I'll go back to sleep. I'm old and can't compare to you young people. As he said this, he waved his hand and walked out. Seeing this, Fengjiu also stood up and prepared to go back to the courtyard to sleep. Unexpectedly, Yingyi's voice came from behind. Ghost Doctor, Master wants you to stay on night watch. Hearing this, she turned back in shock. Night watch? Why should I? Yingyi glanced at her and said, Master's orders don't have so many whys. Master's hands and legs are inconvenient. Do whatever he wants you to do. Chapter 193. Come in. Hearing the voice coming from the room, she gritted her teeth and walked in. When she entered the room, she saw the Yama Lord half lying on the bed. She asked, What's the matter? The Yama Lord glanced at her. She didn't know what he was thinking. After a while, he said, Help me change into a clean set of clothes. Why didn't you ask Yingyi to help you change? She instinctively blurted out the words and met his cold gaze. Seeing this, she cowered and asked, "Where are the clothes?" "In the wardrobe." His gaze fell on her body. He watched as she opened the wardrobe and messed up the clothes inside. Only then did she take out a white undershirt and a black jacket. Coming to the bedside, Fengjiu stared at him on the bed and suddenly smiled. "Do you need me to help you take off your clothes?" "Take it off." He stared at her, trying to see if there was any shyness on her face. However, he was disappointed. He only saw her eyes light up because of his words. She stared at his body like a wolf. That gaze was just like a lecherous woman. Looking at her like this, he really couldn't imagine what kind of family could raise such a strange girl. Another thing that surprised him was that he didn't know when he had gotten used to her touch, but he didn't feel disgusted like other women when they touched him. He attributed this strange feeling to mistaking her for a young man. That was why he accepted her from the bottom of his heart. Hearing his words, Fengjiu was a little excited. She grinned and put the clothes on the bed. She swallowed her saliva and said excitedly, "Then, I'll take them off." "Helping me change my clothes can make you this excited? What are you so excited about?" he asked with amusement. He felt that her thoughts were really strange. "Hey, didn't I say it before? I like handsome men the most, especially men like Yama Lord. It's rare to have a chance to help Yama Lord change his clothes. How can I not be excited?" She smiled and her eyes narrowed. Her hands had already unbuttoned his shirt. His clothes were half open, revealing his sexy chest. She swallowed her saliva. Fuck. How could anyone live with such a figure? The beautiful man on the bed was leaning against the bed with his clothes half undone. His chest was half hidden and half visible in front of her eyes. She couldn't see his face clearly because of the half mask he was wearing, but his deep and seductive eyes were as seductive as a fairy's. His sexy thin lips were slightly raised for some reason, and the corners of his lips were slightly curved. His masculine charm made her almost unable to resist pouncing on him. This was a blatant temptation to commit a crime, if it wasn't for the fact that the other party was too strong. TSK, she really wanted to pounce on him. At this time, the Yama Lord's heart was rippling because of her words. "I like handsome men the most, especially men like you, the Yama Lord." It could be said that this was the first time that such a strange feeling had surfaced in his heart. There was some joy, some pleasure, and he didn't even realize that the corners of his lips had curled up because of the pleasure. Looking at her swallowing her saliva because of his figure, her eyes shining, he felt a strange sense of pride and satisfaction. Thinking of this strange feeling, his eyes flashed with a trace of discomfort. He coughed lightly and said in a low voice, "Don't dawdle. Hurry up." Okay. She narrowed her eyes with a smile and quickly took off his shirt. Her hand had just touched his belt when he grabbed it. Chapter 194. Aren't you going to change your pants? She raised her eyebrows and looked at him. His face darkened when he heard this and saw the light in her eyes. "I'll just change my shirt." "Oh," she replied regretfully. She glanced at the belt. Just a little bit more, just a little bit more. The Yama Lord's mouth twitched when he saw the expression on her face. He couldn't bear to look at her anymore and looked away. After changing his blood-stained shirt, the Yama Lord lay down to rest and ordered, "Go sleep in the outer room. I'll call you if there's anything." Fengjiu glanced at him and asked, "Aren't you going to take off your mask?" This person seemed to be wearing a mask all the time, even when he was sleeping. It was as if he didn't want her to recognize him. Could it be someone she knew? "Get out." The Yama Lord glanced at her and said coldly. Fengjiu shrugged when he saw this, and he didn't say anything further. He walked to the soft couch in the outer room and lay down. He was unable to sleep with his eyes closed, and he was thinking in his heart. How should I escape? Should she take some spiritual medicine with her before she escaped? The next morning, the Yama Lord woke up and walked out of the outer room. He saw the figure curled up on the soft couch. The black and green ointment on her face seemed to have dried after a night. The surface was slightly cracked, but she was still sleeping like a pig and snoring. He lifted his leg and kicked her leg, but she retracted her leg and murmured, "Go play somewhere else. Don't disturb me." He raised his eyebrows and his deep eyes flashed. He looked at her deeply and walked out. When he reached the courtyard, he ordered the guards to get water for him to wash up. When it was about 7 in the morning, Feng Ju turned over, but she forgot that she was sleeping on a soft bed. As soon as she turned around, she fell to the ground with a bang. The sound was so loud that even Yang Zhu, who was eating breakfast outside, heard it. Hiss. She took a deep breath, rubbed her sore arm, and stood up. Her whole person was awake. When she looked up, she saw Yingyi standing at the door, staring at her with a curious expression. She immediately glared at him. "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen people fall to the ground?" "Kai." Yingyi sneered, nodded, and said, "I've never seen anyone fall out of bed while sleeping." "How deep are you sleeping?" Feng Jiu ignored him and touched the ointment on his face. It had already dried. He then said, "I'll take my leave first." Without waiting for him to speak, he quickly walked out. When he arrived outside the courtyard, he saw the Yama lord eating his breakfast. He stopped when he saw the exquisite food on the table and shouted to the guards outside, "Bring me more bowls and chopstick." After rinsing his mouth, he came to the table and sat down. "I think you don't mind me eating with you." She took the bowl and chopsticks from the guard and took a bite of a green dumpling. Her eyes lit up and she said vaguely, "Ien. It's even wrapped in gravy. It smells so good." Looking at her greedy face, as if she hadn't eaten for hundreds of years, the Yama lord slowed down his eating speed and ordered, "Get someone to bring me more." Hearing that casual voice, Yingyi raised his head in astonishment. Seeing that his master didn't dislike the young man's face that was smeared with ointment, and even asked him to serve another portion, he couldn't help but have more thoughts in his heart. Chapter 195. Why are you still in a daze? Hearing his master's faintly displeased voice, he hurriedly returned to his senses and glanced at the youth who was eating happily. He hurriedly responded, "Yes." He walked out and told the guards outside to go to the kitchen and ask them to send more. Her eyes lit up when she saw the few plates of piping hot desserts and dishes served on the table, and she hurriedly picked up some for Yang Luo as a show of hospitality. "Yama lord, eat this." Then, without caring whether he ate or not, she helped him with the chopsticks and began to eat her own. Seeing her helping his master with the chopsticks, Yingyi, who was waiting at the side, glared at her. "You should eat your own food. Why are you helping your master? Master doesn't eat." Before he could say the words, someone else picked up the food. He saw his noble and domineering master stare at the food in the bowl for a while, then pick up the food and eat it. This made him feel suffocated in his heart, neither up nor down, and it was very uncomfortable. When Feng Jiu saw him eat, she smiled and narrowed her eyes, as if she was the master. She didn't forget who was the one who was eating in whose courtyard. After she picked up some food, she helped him with some. "Yama lord, try this, you haven't eaten yet." She picked up the last piece of dessert from a small plate and gave it to him. There were 4 pieces in each small plate, but she only gave the last piece to him after eating 3 of them. This eagerness made the king of hell raise his eyebrows. Yingyi at the side was about to cry. He wanted to shout, "Master, can't you be a little more reserved? Why didn't you refuse? That young man ate whatever he picked up. The other party is a man, where is your integrity?" Feng Jiu felt happy after eating breakfast. She touched her round belly, burped and stood up. "I have to go back, I'm so full." Looking at the girl who left after finishing her breakfast, Lord Yang glanced at the empty plates on the table and asked, "Don't you usually provide her with her meals?" Yingyi lowered his head and replied, "Yes, but the food that others eat is definitely not as good as master's." Her master's meals were all personally prepared by a first-class chef. Every dish was exquisite and delicious. Naturally, other people's meals couldn't compare to it. Hearing this, the Yama lord nodded, stood up, and walked out. When Yingyi saw this, he followed him out of the courtyard and ordered the guards outside, "Let people clean up the table." Then he quickly followed his master in front. After returning to the courtyard, Feng Jiu washed off the dried ointment on his face. Seeing that the scars on his face were fading day by day, he could not help but smile happily. This is the biggest benefit of coming here. She applied some more ointment on her face and walked out with a face covered with ointment. She wanted to walk to digest the food, but when she came to the rockery, she saw a black figure standing by the pond with his hands behind his back. She saw the black figure standing with his hands behind his back. Half of his face was handsome and resolute, and the silver half of his mask reflected a dazzling light under the sunlight. She shook her head inwardly and cursed, Ivildor. She wanted to turn around and walk away, but she didn't expect to eat breakfast at his place this morning. After thinking about it, she walked over. Yama Lord, you. Ah. As soon as she spoke, her foot slipped and her whole body fell forward. Ying Yi, who was standing not far away, saw her slip and her whole body fell forward. Seeing that she was about to fall into the pond, he secretly laughed. This kid, he deserved it. Chapter 196. When the Yama Lord heard her voice, he turned around to look at her. When he saw her slip on a pebble and fall towards the edge of the pool, he almost instinctively rushed forward to catch her. But the moment she fell into his arms, he was stunned. The young girl's petite body crashed into his arms, her soft body pressed against his firm and strong chest. The faint scent of medicine that belonged to her body wafted into his nose, stirring up a slight ripple in his heart. That pair of white hands tightly grasped the front of his clothes, her small face buried in his chest, only her glossy and soft black hair could be seen. The person in his arms raised her head in astonishment, meeting his deep gaze. At such a close distance, when their eyes met, an indescribable feeling quietly spread in his heart. And when the two of them fell into the eyes of Ying Yi, who was not far away, the two of them were looking at each other affectionately, causing him to be in a mess. Wasn't that right? Those were two grown men. Even if the young man was a little petite, the fact that he was a man could not be ignored. But now, Master was actually holding the young man's waist without letting go, and the two of them were so close that their eyes were looking at each other. That scene made him instinctively look around. He thought to himself, I can't let anyone else see this. Otherwise, my master's reputation will be completely ruined. Fengjiu looked in astonishment at the Yama Lord who had one hand around her waist. Her mind did not have the messy and indescribable feelings of the Yama Lord. She only thought, I'm a man now, is it really appropriate for him to hold a man like this? Being stared at like this by his deep gaze, she could not help but shiver, goosebumps rising all over her body, and quickly retreated. Sorry, my foot slipped. As she spoke, she retreated and smiled embarrassedly. I just came to say hello, you can continue. Looking at the woman who ran away like she was running for her life, the Yama Lord lowered his head and looked at his hand, as if he was thinking about something. Seeing this, Ying Yi finally could not help but say something. Master, there are a few extremely beautiful women who have come to the beauty pavilion in the past 2 days. The Yama Lord looked at him. And then this subordinate thought, Master, do you need them to come over at night to serve you? After saying this, Ying Yi only saw his master sweeping a cold gaze at him, which made his scalp tingle and he almost couldn't help but kneel down. On the other side, Fengjiu rubbed his arms as he walked and muttered, could this Yama Lord really be gay? But even if he's gay, he shouldn't be interested in me, right? No matter what, my face is already ruined. How could he be interested in a face covered in black and blue ointment? I don't think so. I must be thinking too much. She gently exhaled and calmed herself down. Seeing that the medicine pavilion was just in front, she strode in and greeted Elder Lin, who was checking the herbs in the courtyard. Elder Lin. It's Gongui. Elder Lin turned to look at her, then suddenly looked left and right. He came to her side and asked, I heard that Master asked you to keep watch last night? She nodded. Why would Master ask you to keep watch? What did he ask you to do? Elder Lin's tone was strange, and he looked at her with a puzzled gaze. Chapter 197. Nothing much. I just helped him change his clothes and then went to sleep. She said helplessly. She was a man now, okay? Being looked at like this and asked like this, did he really think that there was something unspeakable between her and his master? Sleep. Elder Lin exclaimed in shock. His voice was slightly raised because of the shock. Almost as soon as the voice came out, everyone in the courtyard looked at them. Why are you making a fuss? We're sleeping separately. She rolled her eyes speechlessly. Phew. You scared me to death. Elder Lin patted his chest and sighed softly. Oh right, you can make a few more bottles of medicine in the next 2 days. 3rd grade medicine is fine too. It's best if you can make 2 or 3 more bottles of 4th grade medicine. The one from last time is fine too. Hearing this, she turned her eyes and said, okay, I'll go upstairs to get the medicine. As she spoke, she went into the building by herself. Based on his master's attitude towards him, he could take whatever medicine he wanted. He just had to register it afterwards. Therefore, Elder Lin did not follow. 2 days later, in the main courtyard. At the stone table in the courtyard, the Yama Lord supported his head with one hand and read a book with the other. His eyes did not leave the book. His expression, no matter how one looked at it, looked like he was in a trance. But the corner of Ying Yi's mouth twitched slightly and he looked at the sky speechlessly. He had been standing here for nearly an hour, wondering if he should remind his master that he was holding the book upside down. But when he saw his master flipping to the next page after a while, he wondered if the book was meant to be read upside down. Ying Yi. Hearing his master call him, Ying Yi immediately came back to his senses. He took a step forward and answered loudly, "This subordinate is here." The Yama Lord looked up from the book and looked at Ying Yi, who was standing upright with his chest puffed out, with a somewhat puzzled look, and asked, "What are you doing?" "This subordinate is waiting for master's orders." The Yama Lord looked him up and down, then pondered for a while and asked, "Tell me, if a person always inadvertently thinks of another person, why do you think it is?" "Because I want to kill him," Ying Yi answered without thinking. This was because when he kept thinking about someone, that person was definitely someone he wanted to kill. Hearing this, the Yama Lord glanced at him strangely. "If you don't want to kill her, but want to." He paused because it was difficult to express. "Don't want to kill him?" Ying Yi looked at him. Suddenly, as if he thought of something, he hesitated and said, "Master, if a man wants a woman, then he should have some thoughts about that woman, but what? However, if a man wants to be a man, then I'm afraid that is gay." He spoke cautiously while paying attention to his master's expression. "You have thoughts about women?" The Yama Lord murmured in disbelief. Because he hated women to begin with, how could he have any thoughts about women? However, for the past 2 days, that person's figure and that pair of sly and smiling eyes kept appearing in his mind. There was also that strange feeling in his heart, which made him feel that he had to figure it out. Tonight, go to the beauty pavilion and bring 2 women over. Chapter 198. Yama Lord glanced at him and said in a low voice, "Just go. Why are you talking so much nonsense?" Yes. I'll go now." Ying Yi answered in surprise and hurried out. God had opened his eyes. His master was finally interested in women. He was so worried these 2 days. He was really afraid that his master would really become gay. Hui Lang, who had stayed in the Cool Breeze gang for several days, was coming back. Seeing Ying Yi grinning foolishly, he was a little surprised. He stopped him and asked, "What's wrong? Why are you so happy?" "Oh, you're back. Is the Cool Breeze gang comfortable?" Ying Yi asked jokingly. Hearing him mention it, Hui Lang's face darkened. "Don't mention the Cool Breeze gang to me." Then he glanced at him and asked, "You haven't told me yet. What makes you so happy?" Hey, let me tell you. My master asked me to go to the beauty restaurant and arrange 2 beauties to be sent there at night." He came forward and said with a happy face. "Women?" Hui Lang looked at him with astonishment. "My master asked you to arrange 2 women to serve him? Did I hear it wrong?" "It's true. I think my master is enlightened." Grey Wolf's face was full of disbelief as he asked, "Did anything special happen in the past few days when I was away? My master, did he get stimulated by something?" After all, their master couldn't even stand women getting close to him. How could he ask Ying Yi to arrange 2 women? Could it be that his misogyny was cured? "Let's talk about it later. I'll go to the beauty restaurant and tell them." He patted him on the shoulder and strode to the beauty restaurant. In his opinion, it was a big deal to choose two beauties to serve his master at night. He couldn't be careless. At night, Fengjiu went out for a walk after dinner. When she came to the pavilion, she saw Yingyi leading two beautiful and enchanting women to the rockery. She was curious and shouted, "Yingyi!" Yingyi heard the voice and looked over. Seeing the young man in red, he couldn't help but grin. "It's the ghost doctor. What a coincidence." Fengjiu walked over and looked at the two beautiful women behind him. He asked, "How can there be two such beautiful women? Could she be one of the beauties in the beauty pavilion?" As far as she knew, there were only beauties in the beauty pavilion in this Yama tower. The other places, even the main courtyard of the Yama Lord's courtyard, were all served by shadow guards. It was rare to see such a woman walking around. He, as expected of the ghost doctor, "You guessed it right." Yingyi seemed to want to explain. After looking at the two beautiful women behind him, he said to Fengjiu, "These two are the new beauties of Beauty House. Master ordered me to bring them over to serve him." Serve in bed?" Fengjiu widened his eyes in astonishment and said with a strange expression, "Two at once? Can your master take it?" Hearing this, Yingyi was displeased, and his face darkened. "What do you mean by that? Look at my master's strong and healthy body. Do you think he's a useless man?" Hearing this, Fengjiu's mouth twitched. He was speechless for a while. "I won't disturb the ghost doctor's stroll," Yingyi said and led them to the main courtyard. Seeing this, Fengjiu's eyes moved slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a wicked smile. He immediately followed. Chapter 199. In the main courtyard, the Yama Lord, who had just finished bathing, walked out with water droplets on his hair. He sat down at the table and poured himself a glass of water. Just then, he heard Yingyi's voice from outside. "Master, come in." A deep and magnetic voice came from inside. Yingyi heard the voice and walked in. When he saw the Yama Lord sitting at the table, he went forward and asked, "Master, I've brought them here. Should I let them in now?" "Let them in?" "Yes." Yingyi's voice was tinged with excitement. He immediately went out and brought the two women in. The Yama Lord looked at him strangely. He really didn't know what he was excited about. What he didn't know was that a certain restless little thing was climbing up the tree to the roof and quietly climbing to the roof of the main house. Because the main courtyard of the Yama Lord's courtyard was empty except for the two guards guarding it, no one noticed the red figure on the roof. After Yingyi brought the two women in, he retreated, closed the door on the way, and guarded outside the courtyard with a grin. In the room, the Yama Lord looked at the two beautiful women. In his mind, he thought of the girl's disfigured face. His eyes flashed and he was a little distracted. "Master, let this servant dry master's hair," one of the women said softly. She looked at the handsome man with eyes full of infatuation and joy. The Yama Lord came back to his senses, but when he saw that the woman was wearing a red dress, he frowned and said unhappily, "Who allowed you to wear red clothes?" He naturally released his pressure and the aura of a superior. The two women were so shocked that their legs went weak and they knelt down. "Master, please forgive us." At this time, Fengjiu came to the roof and held his breath. He quietly lifted a tile and looked inside. He saw the two women trembling in front of the Yama Lord. She thought to herself, "He really doesn't know how to be gentle with women. Get up and dry your hair." He calmed his face and tried to restrain his pressure. "Yes, yes." The woman in red quickly responded. She got up and went to the screen to pick up a towel. She carefully helped him dry the water droplets on his hair. The Yama Lord stared at the beautiful woman standing in front of him. He frowned and said, "You, come here." "Yes." The woman nodded and looked up at the Yama Lord shyly. Then, she walked up to him. Yama Lord stared at the slender waist in front of him and raised his hand to hug it. However, when he touched it, he felt that something was wrong. They were clearly the same woman with the same waist. Why did it feel different when he hugged it? When the woman saw Yang Zhu's grip on her waist tightened and loosened, she was overjoyed. She snuggled up to him and called out softly, "Master." As soon as the voice came out, his whole body was violently pushed away and fell to the ground in a sorry state. "Ah." the woman exclaimed and fell to the ground. Her eyes were filled with tears. She looked at the man, who suddenly changed his expression with a pitiful and timid look. When Yingyi heard the exclamation in the room, he quickly opened the door and ran in. What happened? However, when he saw the scene in the room, he was also a little dumbfounded. Who allowed you to lean on me? Yama Lord stood up. The pressure and cold aura spread out from his body. It was so terrifying that the two women in the room trembled and knelt down. They didn't dare to raise their heads. Suddenly, a small sound came from the roof. Yama Lord's eyes were cold. He shouted in a deep voice, "Who is it?" He gathered a palm wind and hit the roof. Ah! Chapter 200. When the Yama Lord saw the familiar red figure, his eyes narrowed and he quickly rushed forward to catch the person. Fengjiu also instinctively hugged his neck and buried his face in his head. When he felt safe, he raised his head and saw his dark face. He smiled awkwardly. Yama Lord, I didn't disturb you, did I? As soon as the voice fell, his eyes fell on his face without a mask. Suddenly, he felt that this face seemed to be a bit familiar. When Yingyi saw him again, he couldn't help but reach out to cover his face. Why is he everywhere? What the hell? And when he saw him fall, his master actually rushed forward to catch him, as if he was afraid that he would hurt him. At that moment, he was so nervous that his face turned pale. Oh no! His master really likes this kid. Holding the person in his arms, the Yama Lord's face darkened and he asked with an angry voice, "Why did you climb to the roof? Don't you know that you will be mistaken for an assassin and killed? Damn it! Why is this woman so troublesome?" If he hadn't seen clearly that it was her, he wouldn't have hit her again. Otherwise, she would have been dead by now. Here I climbed to the roof to admire the moon. Yes, admire the moon. She smiled awkwardly, seeing that she was still in his arms. She quickly said, "Yama Lord, you can put me down." At this time, the Yama Lord's eyes fell on her arm. Her red clothes were torn, and there was a bloody cut on her white arm. When Fengjiu noticed his gaze on her arm, she looked over as well. She smiled and said, "You must have been scratched by the tiles when you fell. It's not a big deal. I'll go back and bandage it." As she spoke, she struggled to get out of his arms, but who would have thought that he would not let her go? He even used that fierce and angry gaze to threaten her, causing her entire body to stiffen, not daring to move again. What's wrong with this person? He ignored the two delicate beauties and kept holding her, this man, without letting go. "Yama Lord, you. Shut up," he calmly shouted as he carried her to the table. Seeing the two women still kneeling there, he couldn't help but frown. "Yingyi, send them back." "Master, don't," Fengjiu shouted, looking at the Yama Lord who was hugging her and refusing to let go, and said, "Didn't I come to serve you in bed? Why did you chase him away? Look at these two beauties, they are so delicate and beautiful, and their figures are so hot. It would be a pity to send them back." Yingyi gave Fengjiu a rare look of approval, feeling that what he said was exactly what he was thinking. It wasn't easy for his master to send two beauties over to serve him, but if he were to send them back now, wouldn't his efforts be in vain? It didn't matter if his efforts were in vain, but the problem was, if his master's orientation was really bent, what should he do? Serve in bed? The Yama Lord glanced at Fengjiu. "Who told you that they are here to serve you?" "Yingyi," she said without thinking. Hearing this, the Yama Lord coldly glanced at Yingyi, then lowered his head to look at the woman in his arms, and asked, "So, you sneaked onto the roof?" "Hehe, I haven't seen a dragon and two phoenixes fight before." As soon as she said this, she felt that something was wrong and quickly shut her mouth. Chapter 201. The Yama Lord glanced at him and sat down at the table with Fengjiu in his arms. "Bring the medicine." Seeing this, Yingyi had no choice but to take the two women out. At the same time, he brought in the medicine and put it on the table. Seeing his master holding the boy and sitting on his lap, he opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. Fengjiu's body stiffened. Sitting on the Yama Lord's lap was like sitting on a needleboard. It was uncomfortable, but someone didn't seem to notice anything wrong. He continued to do his own thing and didn't feel anything wrong. Hades, about that, my injuries are nothing. I won't trouble you to apply medicine for me. I'll go back first. As she spoke, she tried to stand up, but as soon as her butt left his thigh, it was pressed down. Sit down. Her body stiffened and was pressed back to his lap. She didn't dare to move. When Yingyi saw this, he could only sigh softly and walk outside to guard the door. Needless to say, his master was in deep trouble and couldn't be pulled back. Yingyi. Why did I see the two women crying and going back? What's going on? Didn't master let them serve him? Hui Lang came in and saw Yingyi outside the door. He couldn't help but be curious. Why are you here? Yingyi stood at the door and glanced inside. He stepped forward and stopped the man. He didn't want him to see that his master was holding the young man and applying medicine to his wound. What's going on? Why are you stopping me? Hui Lang didn't know what was going on. Seeing the door wasn't closed, he poked his head inside and saw Yingyi blocking his way. He couldn't help but be annoyed. He reached out and pulled him away. What are you doing? But when he saw the scene in the room, his legs went soft and he almost fell down. I didn't see wrong, right? Master is holding that kid. He grabbed Yingyi's clothes with one hand, his eyes wide with shock. Yingyi pulled him outside to prevent his master from hearing him. Even if you saw it, pretend you didn't see it. Go back to where you came from. Master doesn't have time to see you now. No, they. Don't ask me, I don't know anything. Yingyi pursed his lips and went back to guard the door with a dark face. In the room, Fengjiu looked at the extremely ugly bandage on his forearm. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. He turned his head slightly and looked at the unmasked Yama Lord at such a close distance. The more he looked, the more he felt that he had seen him before. Yama Lord, have we not met before? Hearing this, the Yama Lord suddenly remembered that he had not put on his mask after the shower. His eyes flashed with a faint light. He looked up at her and did not intend to withdraw his hand from her waist. Instead, he diverted his attention and asked, "How long do you plan to put this on your face?" Fengjiu was stunned for a moment. Thinking of the black and green ointment on his face, he grinned. It should be done in a few days. In a few days, her beautiful face will be restored. Just thinking about it made him excited. Looking at her smiling eyes, the faint smell of medicine that belonged to her body rushed into his nose. With a soft and warm body in his arms, his eyes gradually darkened. His throat moved up and down, and he felt a fire in his body. He didn't feel anything for anyone, but for her, he had an incomprehensible impulse. What does it feel like to be excited? Perhaps, he already knew. Chapter 202. The Yama Lord's gloomy eyes fell on her pink lips. Seeing her moist lips blossom into a devilish smile, he couldn't help but feel his heart stir. He looked at her teasing expression and said in a low and hoarse voice, "I feel like I can't bear to let go." Hearing this, Fengjiu, who originally wanted to tease him, twitched her mouth. Seeing his handsome face getting closer and closer, she fiercely broke free from his hand and jumped up. She retreated from his side and stared at him vigilantly with a face full of anger. "Yama Lord, I'm not gay. Even if you want to harm me, you can't harm me. I'm still young. I'm only 15 years old, I'm just a flower bud waiting to bloom. I can't withstand your devastation." Outside the door, Yingyi heard this and nodded with tears in his eyes. He thought to himself, that's right. Master, even if you're gay, you can't pick this boy. What's so good about this brat? He's crafty, strange, and disfigured. If you really like him, it's not you who's going to ruin him, it's him who's going to ruin you. Hearing his words, a few black lines appeared on Yama Lord's forehead. Love of men and women? Who said he's gay? What kind of nonsense is this woman thinking all day long? Seeing her face full of fear and wariness, his heart gradually calmed down. He relaxed his expression and looked at the woman with a face full of annoyance. His voice was cold and carried a bit of gritting teeth. "You're thinking too much, I don't have any bad habits." When he said this, would Fengjiu believe him? The answer, of course not. So, as she moved out, she smiled and said, "Actually, I also think that you don't have any bad habits. Yingyi also said that you're definitely a good-looking and useful man. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten you two beauties at once, right? Hearing this, Yingyi, who was outside the door, burst into tears. I say, little ancestor, can you not drag me into everything you say? The Lord of Hell did not move from his seat. His finger tapped the edge of the table from time to time. He watched as the woman took small steps to the door and ran out of the room. It's getting late, so I won't disturb the Yama Lord's rest. As soon as he finished speaking, he had already disappeared without a trace. Yingyi. Hearing his master calling him from inside the room, Yingyi braced himself and walked in. Mars, master. You told her that I want you to bring two women to serve me in bed. Yama Lord's eyes fell on Yingyi with a faint smile, and he didn't dare to raise his head. This subordinate met the ghost doctor at the pavilion. He asked, this subordinate just. Cold sweat the size of beads seeped out from his forehead, and he couldn't even speak properly. Maybe you want to stay in the Cool Breeze gang for a few days? Hearing this, Yingyi's face turned pale, and he knelt down with a thump. Master, this subordinate will not do it again. Leave. If there's a next time, I won't forgive you. He waved his hand, indicating that Yingyi should leave. Yes. Yingyi secretly breathed a sigh of relief and quickly got up to leave. After he left, he couldn't help but frown when he thought of how that woman avoided him like he was a snake. He touched his chin and thought to himself, could it be that she doesn't like my appearance? It shouldn't be. He was very confident in his appearance. But, if that's the case, why didn't that woman buy it? Chapter 203. After returning to her room, Fengjiu lay on her bed. After thinking for a while, she decided that she should run away. That Yama Lord was a little abnormal. Her face was almost healed, so it was better to find a time to escape. If she stayed any longer, who knows what would happen. The next day, she gave the concocted medicine to Elder Lin and took a lot of spiritual herbs from the medicine house. Just as she was about to walk out of the medicine house, she saw Elder Lin coming in with a big box. So, she asked, Elder Lin, what is that in your hand? Hihi, this is 1,000-year-old ginseng, a rare treasure in 100 years. Look, this is the best of the best. He opened the box, his eyes full of excitement. Just a small piece of this 1,000-year-old ginseng can save the life of a weak person. In many cases, it is a life-saving medicine. What a big one. The roots are intact and the texture is clear. It is indeed a rare treasure. Her eyes lit up. She reached out to touch it, but Elder Lin covered her hand. He looked at Fengjiu warily and held the box in his arms. This is a treasure among treasures. Don't think about this 1,000-year-old ginseng. This thing should be saved for a life-saving situation. I know, I'm just looking. She smiled embarrassedly, but in her heart, she was thinking that when she was about to leave, she must steal this 1,000-year-old ginseng. For the whole day, she avoided the Yama Lord and tried her best not to meet him. Until the night deepened, she calculated the time and walked to the hot spring at the back of the mountain. She planned to soak in the hot spring tonight. When the Yama Lord went out or was not around, she would quietly leave. After taking off her clothes, she tied a thin veil around her body and carefully walked into the hot spring. The hot spring at the back of the mountain was deep. She could only walk along the edge and sit down in the water. Leaning on the edge, she sighed, it's so comfortable. Because the night was getting darker, the sky was dotted with stars. It was very beautiful. If you want to soak in the hot spring, why didn't you call me? The sudden voice scared her so much that she almost jumped up. However, when she remembered that she was only wearing a thin veil, she immediately sank back into the water. She looked angrily at the person who had walked out from the shadows. Why are you here? The Yama Lord walked out with his hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't wearing a mask, and his face was as handsome as a god's. However, his deep gaze was fixed on the woman in the water. When his gaze landed on her smooth shoulders, he didn't look away. Instead, he openly admired her. Speaking of which, this was the second time he had seen her in the water. Last time, he didn't have any other thoughts in his mind, so he didn't pay much attention to it. But looking at her now, he felt that the woman in the water was as beautiful as a painting under the moonlight. Even if her face was still covered with the ointment, it still did not affect her beauty in his eyes. He clasped his hands behind his back and stood by the edge of the hot spring. Looking at the woman curled up in the water, a faint smile appeared on his handsome and resolute face. This is Ben Jun's place. What's so strange about Ben Jun appearing here? As he spoke, he took off his boots, undid the jade belt on his waist, took off his outer clothes, and then took off his inner clothes, revealing his strong and sexy upper body. Looking at the man who was reaching for his trousers to take off his trousers, she suddenly became nervous and stuttered. Chapter 204. I'm taking off my clothes. Didn't you see it? His voice was low and magnetic. If one didn't pay attention, they wouldn't have noticed that there was a hint of a smile in his voice. She glared at him angrily and said, "Of course I know you're taking off your clothes. I'm asking why you're taking off your clothes. To soak in the hot springs, of course," he answered matter-of-factly. "Can't you see that I'm soaking in the hot springs?" She asked through gritted teeth. "We're all men. What's wrong with soaking in the hot springs together?" He raised his eyebrows and smirked. Hearing this, Fengjiu almost jumped up and scolded him. "What do you mean we're all men? What do you mean it's okay to soak in the hot springs together? I'm not wearing any clothes, okay?" She's already curled up into a ball. What would happen if he got into the water? But at that moment, she saw him take off his trousers and was about to take off his underwear. Seeing this, her heart tightened. She should have looked away, but her eyes seemed to be attracted by a magnet. She stared straight at him. Seeing her staring at his movements without avoiding his gaze, the corners of King Yang's lips curled up slightly. His hand on his pants paused for a moment, and he said in a good mood, "I heard from Grey Wolf that the last time you treated him, you only pierced the acupuncture points on his waist. What else?" She rolled her eyes. But as soon as she finished speaking, she remembered what he said and his strange expression. She couldn't help but be startled. She asked, "Don't tell me you think I've seen him naked?" Seeing that he didn't say anything, she couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Heavens! Why would you think that? You actually think I'm that perverted?" Seeing him stare at her with a faint smile, she smiled embarrassedly. "All right. Although I'm quite perverted, I'm also very picky, okay? Like Hui Lang, I'm not interested even if he's naked." "Oh. Then what about someone like me?" Hearing this, the corners of her mouth twitched. "Yama Lord, I remember you saying you don't have any bad habits." A man's words really couldn't be trusted. This guy was obviously in heat. Could it be that spring is coming? Even the Yama Lord's heart is beginning to ripple. "That's right, I'm very normal." He stared straight at her and his lips curled into a wicked smile. Without warning, he took off his pants and stood naked by the hot spring. Looking at the woman whose expression had changed, he felt inexplicably happy. She cried out instinctively, but as soon as she said that, she smiled embarrassedly. Especially when she saw the man walking into the hot spring, she became even more nervous. With one hand covering half of her body with the gauze, she reached out to the side and touched her clothes with the other, intending to slip back. However, the low voice that followed caused her to freeze, and she helplessly withdrew her hand. "If you want to play hide-and-seek with me in the water, I'll be happy to accompany you." The low voice came lazily, but it made Fengjiu so angry that she gritted her teeth. She stared at the man who sank into the water and sat down with his hands spread out. She only thought that if she could, she really wanted to punch him. The Yama King raised his eyebrows when he saw that she had shrunk back 3 meters away, looking as though she was angry but did not dare to speak. His handsome and resolute face was tainted with a wicked smile as his deep voice carried a hint of amusement. Chapter 205. Fengjiu glanced at his proud expression and curled her lips. "It's not that great." "Oh, is that so? Perhaps if this lord comes closer, you'll be able to see it more clearly." He narrowed his eyes and leaned forward. Fengjiu's expression changed when she saw this. She quickly raised her hand and shouted, "Stop, stop, stop. You don't need to come over, you don't need to come over. Your figure is very good, you're quite heavy, You're quite good, all right? What kind of people were they? Even if they wanted to be a hooligan, they shouldn't act like this, right? Did he still want his face? Yama Lord did not go over. In his opinion, she was definitely his woman. Thus, he was not in a hurry at this moment. He didn't want to frighten her and lose more than he could gain. Come over and wipe this lord's back. He leaned against the edge, leaving only his back for her. Seeing this, Fengjiu's eyes flashed. She thought for a bit and said, if you want me to wipe your back, I can do that. However, you have to maintain this position and not turn your head. Yuan, he lazily responded, the corners of his lips slightly hooked. This little woman, she still didn't know that her identity as his woman had already been seen through. Fengjiu only walked over after he responded. When she arrived behind him, a complicated look flashed through her eyes. She was only an alchemist that he had caught, but he actually left his back to her without any precautions. She really didn't know where his trust came from. It had to be known that if it was someone with bad intentions, if he left his back to someone else, they could lose their life at any moment. Where's the towel? Did you bring it? She asked. She saw him reach out and hand over a white towel. After receiving the towel, she began to wipe his back. Even she felt that it was a bit inconceivable. She was actually soaking naked in a hot spring with a man, and she was even wiping his back. This was something that she would never have dared to imagine before. A bit harder. His voice was slightly hoarse, for no other reason than the fact that she was rubbing it too lightly. It was like she was scratching an itch, causing a wave of evil fire to surge through his body. Fengjiu could naturally hear that his voice was low and hoarse. She glanced at him and cursed in her heart. She increased her strength. She originally wanted to use the silver needle hidden in her hair to make him unconscious before leaving, but when she thought of his inexplicable trust, she couldn't do it. After a while, her hands were sore, but a certain man was so comfortable that he didn't move. She stopped and said, Yama Lord, you should have enjoyed enough, right? My hands are so sore, and my skin is almost wrinkled. You can go back first, he said lazily, lying still. Hearing this, she saw that he was lying on his stomach with half-closed eyes. Only then did she move back to where she left her clothes and put them on in the water. Yama Lord watched as she turned her back to put on her clothes, then emerged from the water. She stood up in her wet clothes and planned to walk out. He couldn't help but frown. You're going to walk back in these wet clothes? Because of the wet clothes, they stuck to her body tightly, outlining her exquisite figure. Although she was hugging a ball of gauze in front of her, that faintly discernible charm made his body heat up. What's more, there were many guards on the way back. Wouldn't they all see her naked? What's wrong with wearing wet clothes back? I'll change when I go back to my room. Chapter 206. Wear this lord's robe and go back. A low and hoarse voice came from behind her. His warm breath sprayed into her ear, making her ears feel itchy and numb. She lowered her head slightly and looked at the man's arm that wrapped around her from behind. That strong arm wrapped around her whole body, and a robe was draped over her body from the back to the front, covering her whole body. She didn't turn around. Her body was slightly stiff, not only because he suddenly wrapped his arms around her and put on a robe for her, but also because the body that pressed against her wasn't wearing any clothes, okay? Ian, thank you. She hurriedly responded and quickly walked out. This was the first time that she had to thank someone after being played by a hooligan. It was too sullen. Seeing her slightly flustered footsteps as if she was running for her life, the Yama Lord's lips curled up and he smiled happily. When Yingyi, who was guarding outside the hot spring, saw the figure that hurriedly walked out of the hot spring, he couldn't help but widen his eyes and ask in astonishment, why did you come out from inside? Fengjiu glanced at him and didn't say anything. He just tightened the robe on his body and then walked into the courtyard. Oh, heavens! Did I see wrongly? He's actually wearing Master's robe, he exclaimed and stared at the figure that disappeared into the night. He couldn't wait to go into the hot spring to see what was going on. But the hot spring was set up with an array and he couldn't go in. Not long after, when he saw his master walk out wearing only his inner robe, Yingyi hurriedly went up and stuttered, Master, Why did this subordinate saw the ghost doctor come out from inside? These two people, could it be that they were bathing like mandarin ducks in there? His master, who was as handsome as a banished immortal and as mighty as a god, was actually bathing like a mandarin duck with that weak and disfigured ghost doctor. Just thinking about that scene made his mouth twitch and he didn't dare to think about it anymore. What a coincidence, she's also bathing in the hot spring. The Yama Lord smiled and walked into the courtyard. Yingyi looked at the sky speechlessly. Was it a coincidence? Was it really a coincidence? His master usually wouldn't come to the hot spring at this time. Looking at his master's amorous face, he didn't think that his master didn't have a premeditated plan. Back in the main courtyard, the Yama Lord went into his room while the Shadow One stood guard outside. However, his heart was not calm, so he was a little absent-minded while standing guard. He did not even notice Hui Lang coming to his side. Hey, why have you been so distracted these past 2 days? Hui Lang patted Yingyi's shoulder and asked with some confusion. Yingyi glanced at him. He didn't want to tell him, but after thinking for a while, he glanced at the closed door and asked in a low voice, Hui Lang, how many days have you been in the Cool Breeze gang? Did you really see a man seeking pleasure with a prostitute? Yes. Hui Lang nodded. Thinking about how someone had touched his abs, he got goosebumps all over his body. Then how do men and men do that? Why are you curious about this? Hey, why don't you tell your master to go to the Cool Breeze gang to broaden your horizons? Hui Lang smiled maliciously. Yingyi ignored his teasing and said in distress, I'm very worried about my master now. What do you mean? Hui Lang was stunned and puzzled. Don't you see that my master is very special to the ghost doctor? Tonight they were bathing in the hot spring together at the back of the mountain. You didn't see the amorous look on my master's face when he came out. Alas, I'm really afraid that something will happen if it goes on like this. Chapter 207. Amorous Feelings. A deep and magnetic voice came into Yingyi's ears. Yingyi froze when he saw Hui Lang bowing his head and standing there respectfully. He couldn't help cursing in his heart, You're not my brother. Why didn't you remind me when your master came? Then he turned around and saw his master's enlarged face. He twitched his stiff mouth and said, My master. Is amorous feelings written on my face recently? Yama Lord squinted at him. His majestic and cold eyes fell on Yingyi, which inexplicably made him worried. No, that's not it. He lowered his head, looking terrified. I seem to hear that you are very curious about men. In that case, Hui Lang, send Yingyi to the Cool Breeze gang and let him observe for 3 days. Then he turned around and went back. My master. Yingyi cried at Yama Lord's back with a sad face, I'm not interested in men, and I'm not curious about men. I don't want to go to the Cool Breeze gang. Heh, don't shout. Master never takes back his words. Let's go straight. I'll personally send you off. Ha ha ha. Grey Wolf laughed out loud, taking pleasure in his misfortune. He patted him on the shoulder and pulled him out. Yingyi stared at him and said angrily, Hui Lang, you did it on purpose, didn't you? I kept winking at you. You didn't realize it yourself. Who's to blame? Well, my master treats you very well. I was sent to the Cool Breeze gang last time and didn't have the chance to observe. You're different this time. Observe carefully and you won't ask such questions in the future. In this way, Yingyi was sent to the Cool Breeze gang less than 2 days after Hui Lang came back, and all this had nothing to do with Fengjiu in the courtyard. She was now preparing to escape. At noon the next day, Hui Lang came to Fengjiu's courtyard. He knocked on the door and said, Dr. Ghost. Fengjiu opened the door and walked out. Seeing Hui Lang, he was a little surprised and asked, What's the matter? This Hui Lang actually dared to look for her. Wasn't he afraid that she would give him another injection? Master wants you to have a meal with him. He looked at the black and green face in front of him. He really couldn't understand why his master wanted him to accompany him for a meal. Hearing this, she smiled sheepishly. No need. Just tell him that I've already eaten. With that, she retreated and closed the door. Seeing this, Hui Lang frowned, but he didn't dare to forcefully take her there. Thus, he went back to report to his master. Meanwhile, in the main courtyard, after hearing Hui Lang's report, the Yama Lord's face darkened. This woman is avoiding me. Seeing that his master's expression was not very good, Hui Lang did not dare to open his mouth and stood at the side in a well-behaved manner. At this moment, a black-clothed cultivator hurried in from outside and bowed on one knee. "Greetings, master." The Yama Lord glanced at him and asked, "Why are you back?" "Master, I've caught the man and he's waiting for you to interrogate him." Hearing this, the Yama Lord's deep eyes narrowed. He immediately stood up and said, "Lead the way." When Fengjiu heard that the Yama Lord was going out, in the evening, after Elder Lin finished counting the herbs, he took the 1,000-year-old human spirit and directly put it into his space. Then, he swaggered out, stepped into the array, and quietly left Yang Lu. Chapter 208. Hearing this, the Yama Lord's face instantly darkened. A cold and dangerous aura emanated from his body. He narrowed his deep eyes and stared at Elder Lin. She ran away? Elder Lin and Hui Lang, who was standing behind the Yama Lord, could not help but tense up when they felt the cold aura in the air. Yes. When I went to the medicine building, I saw that the 1,000-year-old ginseng was missing. I went to look for Gui, but he was also missing. I asked the guards and they said that they saw him wandering around in the evening. No one noticed him, so the Yama Lord narrowed his eyes and looked at the dark sky. His eyes were dark and his lips were tightly pursed. He said in a deep voice, "Hui Lang, take someone out to look for her immediately." Yes. Hui Lang accepted the order and was about to leave when he heard the Yama Lord's voice again. "If you find her, don't touch her to avoid hurting her." Hearing this, the corners of Hui Lang's mouth twitched. He quickly lowered his head and answered, "Yes." Then he quickly left. The Yama Lord walked. He did not return to the main courtyard. Instead, he went to the courtyard where Fengjiu lived. Elder Lin, who was following behind him, saw this and opened his mouth. He could only silently retreat. The Yama Lord opened the door and looked at the empty room. His eyes darkened. There seemed to be a lingering medicinal fragrance in the air. He walked around the room. When he came to the side of the room, he touched a piece of paper that was pressed under the pillow. He stepped forward and took it out. When his eyes fell on the paper, he could not help but curl his lips. A rare gentleness appeared on his handsome and resolute face. A woman with perverted thoughts but no guts. On the paper, there were two people clearly drawn. She was dressed in men's clothes. Her index finger gently lifted the naked man's chin, and the other hand fell on his abdominal muscles. Her eyes were looking outside the paper, full of provocation. Her eyes fell on the top of the two people's heads in the drawing. She could not help but whisper, "Yama Lord Xiaoshou? Ghost Dr. Xiaoshou? This woman is really asking for a beating." He laughed and scolded in a low and deep voice. In his heart, he hoped to see her immediately. A feeling called longing rose uncontrollably in his heart, and he was unable to extricate himself from it. However, a feeling arose in his heart. He felt that if she ran away this time, the people he sent out would not be able to catch up to her. After all, that woman was as cunning as a fox and tricky. If he let her run away, it would be difficult to catch up with her again. It was only at this moment that he realized that other than knowing that she was called the Ghost Doctor, he didn't even know her name. If Hui Lang and the others couldn't get her back, then it would be difficult to find her again in the future. Just as the Yama Lord had expected, Hui Lang came back with his men at dawn. He braced himself and reported, "Master, your subordinate has been searching for the Ghost Doctor all night. I'm afraid that she has escaped." The Yama Lord's eyes darkened. This answer was within his expectations. Tell the people of Yang Palace to pay attention to the rumors outside. If they hear any news about the Ghost Doctor, report back immediately. Yes. Hui Lang respectfully replied and went to pass down the instructions. The Yama Lord stood in the courtyard with his hands behind his back. He looked at the sky and the corners of his lips curled slightly. He softly muttered, "We will definitely meet again." At this moment, Fengjiu, who had been unsuccessfully searched for the entire night by the people of Yang Palace, was climbing up the hill with her face covered in dirt. As she walked, she looked at the forest in front of her and laughed excitedly. Ha ha ha. I finally climbed out. Ah. Chapter 209. MN. She rolled from the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill until she crashed into a tree before stopping. That pain made her groan as she fell onto the ground and couldn't get up for some time. Until after a while later, she heaved a sigh of relief as she laid on the ground and looked up at the sky, feeling that it wasn't easy for her to escape from Yang Dian. When she ran out of Yang Dian's array, she then realized that there were mountains on 3 sides and there was only one way out. If she wanted to escape, she naturally couldn't run through that path, so she directly climbed over that mountain. After another night, she walked past several arrays and a barrier before she finally reached here. Luckily, she had used her spiritual energy to break open the seal on her profound energy last night, otherwise she would probably have been captured back. After resting for a while, she stood up and looked around her surroundings, and based on her feelings, she found a direction and continued walking. She intended to contact Lung Shuang after she got out, in case he was worried sick after not hearing from her for such a long time. But what she didn't expect was that she wasn't sure of her current position, so the following scene of danger made her dumbfounded. If she was high up in the sky, she would definitely see that the surrounding 100 miles around her was a forest. Want to walk out? Without 7 to 8 days, don't even think about it. Walking alone in the forest, she looked left and right and felt that this place was a little strange. Every once in a while, there would be a small colored flag stuck in a place, and after walking for a while, some arrays would appear. Some arrays even contained dangers, while some were just some maze arrays. Strange, what exactly is this place? She murmured as she walked. Suddenly, she saw 2 young men who were supporting each other and panting as they sat down under a tree. Her eyes lit up and she quickly walked up to them. Young masters, may I ask? Before she could finish her sentence, the 2 of them heard her voice and almost didn't even look at her as they speedily scurried towards the other side. She was stunned for a moment. She had walked for half a day before she met these 2 people, so she couldn't let them run away. Hence, she chased after them while shouting, "Hey, young masters, don't run, I'm just here to ask for directions." However, it would have been better if she didn't shout. The moment she shouted, the 2 of them ran even faster. What the hell? She frowned and exhaled. Looking at the 2 figures, she did not chase after them. Instead, she followed behind them at a leisurely pace. She thought, if I follow them, I'll be able to get out of here, right? However, she wasn't anxious, but the 2 young men were. Which faction is that person from? Why have you been following us for so long? What is he trying to do? One of them was sweating profusely and had a panicked expression on his face. When he looked back, he saw that the red figure was still slowly following behind him about 30 meters away. He could not help but cry. Phew. I can't run anymore. If I die, so be it. Another chubby young man said as he sat on the ground. He stared at the Fengjiu behind him and shouted, "Which faction are you from? You've been with us for so long, it's enough." Seeing that they had stopped running, Fengjiu quickly walked over. Looking at the 2 vigilant youths, he grinned and said, "I'm just here to ask for directions." "Why are you running?" What? Asking for directions? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.